The Lord of the Hidden Ring I. Prologue. In ancient times, when the gods still watched closely over men, and every deed was measured not only by law, but also by divine justice, a secret was buried in the land of Lydia. Tea was a small object, but a bearer of boundless power, the ring of invisibility. No one knew who had forged it. Some said that it had been crafted by Hephaestus, the master of fire, as a forbidden gift for mortals. Others, that the gods had left it in the world as a temptation, a trap for weak souls, to see what man would choose, when no one could judge him. Entire generations had passed without the ring being found. Tea lay hidden in the tomb of an ancient giant, buried with its secrets, as if the earth wanted to keep it away from the hands of men. But the earth, no matter how deep, cannot hide it from the endlessly what fate wants to bring to light. Thus begins the story of 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, a simple shepherd, without ambitions for power, who in a moment of curiosity and chance would discover the golden ring that would change his life and the fate of the kingdom. To him, the ring seemed nothing more than an ornament. But once turned on his finger, it turned out to be a door to a new world, a world where limits disappear, where man becomes master over the laws and over the gaze of his fellow men. The question that troubled philosophers and kings alike was born then: what does a man do when no one sees him? What choice remains when the fear of punishment disappears? Is justice a true virtue, or just a wall built by fear? This is not just the story of a ring and a king. Tea is the mirror in which each viewer must see his face and ask himself, if I had the ring, what would I have done? Because the curse of 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's ring is not just in its shining gold, but in the response that every mortal must give when power becomes limitless, and conscience the only remaining judge. Chapter 1. The Kingdom of Lydia. In the heart of Asia Minor, where the clear waters of the Pactolus River snaked through the fertile plains, there once stood a kingdom that would remain in history not only for its riches, but also for the stories that enveloped it like a shroud of mystery. This was the kingdom of Lydia, a land where the sun seemed to stop more than in other parts, blessing the earth with a warm and life-giving glow. Lydia was a land of contrasts. Fertile fields full of wheat fields, olive groves, and fruitful vineyards, but also rocky and craggy mountains that hid precious metals in their depths. It was said that the Pactolus River brought threads of gold from the mountains, leaving the sand to sparkle in the sunlight like stars descended to earth. Merchants from all corners of the world came here attracted by the fame of Lydian gold, and the city squares echoed with voices in many languages, from Ionians and Carians to Syrians and Phrygians. The capital of the kingdom, Sardis, rose proudly on a natural promontory, guarded by thick walls and watchtowers. From a distance, the city seemed like a jewel encrusted in the rock, and when the rays of the setting sun touched it, its walls took on shades of purple and gold, as if the sun god, Helios, himself blessed it every evening. And Sardis, the temples of the gods, stood alongside sumptuous palaces and bustling squares. The goddess Cybele, the Great Mother, was especially worshipped here, and the festivals dedicated to her filled the streets with dancing, music, and fragrant offerings. But above all, Sardis was known for its royal palace, an impressive construction of stone and marble, with wide courtyards, gardens of rare flowers, and carved fountains. And the halls of the palace, bronze and gold candelabras illuminated the banquets where the king received distinguished guests, and the sounds of the lyre and flute accompanied the feasts that seemed endless. On the throne of Lydia, at that time, was King 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃, the last descendant of the Heraclidian dynasty, ruled with a sure hand, but also with an almost arrogant confidence in his power. The people respected him, because under his rule the country was prosperous, the army well trained, and trade flourishing. However, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 was a man full of passions and weaknesses, and the greatest of them was his obsessive love for the beauty of his wife. It was said that the Queen of Lydia was one of the most beautiful women in the entire known world. Her name was Pyrrhusane, and the stories speak of an unparalleled beauty, a face like marble bathed in the moonlight and eyes that shone like sapphires. For 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃, this beauty had become a trophy that he wanted to show to anyone, a gift from the gods of which he was proud to the point of blindness. And his council, in the halls of the palace, the king did not hesitate to talk incessantly about his wife, boasting about her face, her grace, the beauty of her body. The courtiers listened patiently, but some smiled at him. Hidden, others were afraid to make any reply. It was both dangerous and indecent for a king to expose his privacy so much, but 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 saw no danger in it. "The gods have blessed me with the most beautiful of mortals," he used to say, "and I want everyone to know that the Queen of Lydia is like a goddess." Beyond the palace walls, the people lived in abundance, but also in fear. Such wealth attracted not only merchants, but also enemies. Along the borders, Phrygian tribes and Cimmerians looked enviously at the fertile lands and gold of Lydia. For this reason, the king's army was always ready, and the borders fortified. However, despite the dangers, the people of Lydia led a better life than many others. Their fields brought them harvests, their craftsmen prospered, and their merchants filled the markets with rare goods, ivory, perfumes from Arabia, carpets from Babylon, Greek ceramics. But what endured above all was the brilliance of gold. Gold from the Pactolus River, gold from the mines of the kingdom, gold that was transformed into jewelry, coins, and temples. Many historians would later say that Lydia was the first kingdom to mint gold and silver coins, making their trade an unparalleled power in this context. But fate was about to strike, bringing a story that would transcend the borders of the kingdom and become a legend. 𝕽𝖎𝖓, despite his greatness and power, was a man crushed by vanity. No matter how much wealth he had, no matter how secure his throne was, he wanted the world to admire and envy the beauty of his queen. This desire slowly pushed him towards a fatal mistake, for he did not understand that beauty was a gift from the gods that must be guarded, not exposed to mockery or temptation. That time, in the service of the king was a shepherd named 𝕽𝖎𝖓, a simple man, but known for his loyalty and courage. Although he was of humble origin, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 had become trustworthy for 𝕽𝖎𝖓, often being called to court to bring him news from distant lands and to serve him on more important missions. Delicate, the king valued it, but above all he used it as a silent witness to his own whims. Fate would thus bind the destinies of a shepherd and a king, and in the middle of this bond would appear the mysterious ring that would change not only their lives, but also the course of the entire kingdom. For a moment, however, Lydia shone in peace and prosperity. People prayed to the gods for good harvests, merchants displayed their goods, and 𝕽𝖎𝖓's palace resounded with songs and feasts. No one suspected that, under this brilliance, the seed of betrayal was hidden, for where there is too much vanity, the gods turn their gaze and let fate follow its merciless path. Thus begins the story of 𝕽𝖎𝖓's ring, in the land of Lydia, under the reign of a king too proud of the beauty of his queen and too blinded by the riches of the world to see the abyss towards which he was heading. Story of desire, power, and temptation, which would raise an eternal question: is justice a virtue of the soul, or just a mask that people wear for fear of punishment? Chapter 2. The Young Shepherd 𝕽𝖎𝖓. At the foot of the hills surrounding Sardis, where green pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, lived a young shepherd named 𝕽𝖎𝖓, born into a modest family, without wealth or rank. He earned his living by caring for the flocks of sheep of the community and often of the royal court. His life unfolded under the sign of simplicity. Dawns found him in the middle of the fields, and nights often surprised him under the open sky, with his eyes fixed on the stars that sparkled like divine torches. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 was a tall, vigorous young man, with broad shoulders and a face lit by the sun. His skin was burned by the mountain winds, and his black hair, always tousled, gave him a wild air. But he was not just an ordinary shepherd. Those who knew him said that he had a curious and restless look, as if the world around him was never enough for him. Questions bubbled in his mind, and sometimes, instead of supervising his sheep, he wandered through forests and valleys, exploring caves, following water courses, or lifting stones to discover what was hidden beneath. In an era when most people were content with the purpose given to them by the gods, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 was different, did not accept anything without seeking an explanation, and this made him both loved and suspected. The villagers sometimes considered him a dreamer, sometimes too bold. The gods know what they are doing, not us, they would tell him. The elders, but 𝕽𝖎𝖓 often replied with a mysterious smile, perhaps the gods want us to know more than we think. Since childhood, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 had heard stories about kings and heroes of old, and these had ignited his imagination. His father, an old shepherd, had told him about the battles fought by the Lydians against the Phrygians, about the gold of the Pactolus River, and about the goddess 𝕬𝖓 who watched over the lands. His mother had sung him old songs about the forbidden love between mortals and goddesses. All this had gathered in the young man's soul and had made him look at the world with eyes hungry for knowledge. But the life of a shepherd was not without its hardships. Often, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 was forced to sleep on cold meadows, wrapped only in a thick cloak, and to protect his flock from wolves or thieves, he had become accustomed to being alone, accompanied only by his faithful dogs and the sound of the wind that had hissed among the rocks. This solitude had given him time to think, observe, and dream, and the silence of the plains. He had built an inner world full of questions and fantasies. One thing distinguished 𝕽𝖎𝖓 from other shepherds: his curiosity. If others were content to gather their sheep and play the whistle, he would roam the hills, climb rocks, enter dark caves, or follow the tracks of animals to discover where they led. More than once he put his life in danger for a simple desire to know. But he was not a madman. In every exploration, in every question, there was a thirst for meaning, a premonition that destiny was preparing him for something more than a life as a shepherd. The elders of the village said that 𝕽𝖎𝖓 had been born under an unusual sign. On the night he was born, a shooting star had crossed the sky, leaving a trail of fire. Some had considered it a good sign, others a warning. But over time, everyone understood that the young man really had something special, the courage to look further than the others. His connection with nature was also profound. He knew his sheep by name, spoke to his dogs as if they were lifelong friends, and knew every spring and tree in the area. Sometimes, the villagers said that 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 spoke to the earth, because he knew in advance when a storm would come or when the ground would move under his feet. This almost mystical sensitivity made him seem both close and alien to the common people. Although he led a simple life, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was often summoned to the court of King 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. It was said that the king had noted him for his bravery in an incident with some robbers who had attacked a royal caravan. The young shepherd, although without special weapons, had managed to defend his flock and chase away the thieves. This incident had reached the ears of the king, who had summoned him to the palace and had watched him with interest. Since then, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 had sometimes been sent on minor missions, as a messenger or a trusted guard. For 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, each visit to the palace was an astonishing experience. The high walls, the shining marble, the pomp of the banquets, and especially the solemn face of the king, all of these made him feel that he lived between two worlds, the world of the simple shepherd and the royal world, full of power and mystery. But deep down, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 did not covet riches. More than gold or choice food, he wanted knowledge. He liked to listen to the stories of the elders of the court, to observe how the generals consulted, to look at the frescoes depicting gods and heroes. The whole world seemed to him an open book, and he wanted to read it to the last page. This thirst for knowledge had to make him vulnerable, but also prepared for the destiny that awaited him. For when the earth would open and when 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 would find the mysterious ring, not just any shepherd, but he, the curious and daring one, would step into the depths. However, until that day, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was still just a young dreamer. He spent his evenings on the heights, looking at the stars. He often wondered what justice was, what luck meant, if the gods really watched people or if fate was a play already written. In the darkness of the night, with the flock gathered around him and the dogs lying next to him, these questions kept his mind awake. Perhaps these very questions were preparing him, without him knowing, for the test of his life, for a man who does not ask himself questions cannot be tempted by absolute power. But one who seeks hidden meanings, that is, when offered chance, he will not stop exploring them, even if it means breaking the laws of men and gods. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was, therefore, a young man with two faces. On the one hand, the simple, loyal, and hard-working shepherd, lover of nature and the quiet life. On the other hand, the restless, curious soul, ready to step beyond the limits, even at the cost of his peace. Destiny had not yet fully shown itself to him, but the signs were already there. The nights of wakefulness, the unspoken questions, the almost unconscious courage to venture where others feared to tread. And one day, all this would lead him to a discovery that would turn his life upside down, transforming him from shepherd to king and from ordinary mortal to a symbol of temptation and power. For the moment, however, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 remained the dreamy shepherd of the Lydian plains, a man who, without he knew, he was already walking on the path that would lead him to the ring that made his name immortal. Chapter 3. The Unexpected Earthquake. The day had begun like any other for 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. The sun had raised its shining disk above the Lydian hills, scattering warm light over the golden wheat fields and fragrant pastures. The air was clear, the birds were singing in the branches, and 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's flock was grazing peacefully. Everything seemed to be proceeding according to the natural order of nature, the same one he had known and loved since childhood. But beneath that peace lay something disturbing. Since morning, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 had felt an inexplicable restlessness. His dogs had been restless, barking at the hills for no reason. The sheep had huddled closer together, as if some unseen danger had driven them together. Even the wind seemed different, carrying with it a harsh smell of burning stone. Something is wrong, he thought. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, looking up at the sky. The clouds were thin, barely outlined against the blue sky, but they seemed to be sliding quickly. Faster than usual, a strange silence descended over the field, a silence that was not natural. The birds had fallen silent. The air seemed to have frozen, as before a great storm, but the sky was clear. Then the earth began to tremble. At first, a slight vibration, barely perceptible, like a shudder coming from the depths. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 stopped, tensing up, and placed his palm on the ground. He felt the earth vibrate under his fingers, like a huge animal breathing hard. The flock raised their heads in fright, and the dogs began to bark. Then the noise grew, a deep rumble, like thunder coming not from the sky, but from the bowels of the world. The earth shook harder, the trees shook their branches, stones began to roll on the ground. The sheep were running wildly, and 𝕽𝖎𝖓 could barely keep his balance. The gods were angry! He cried out in terror. It had long been rumored that the gods, when they wanted to make their presence felt, shook the earth. People said that Poseidon, who struck the seas with his trident, could shake the dry land as well. Others believed that 𝕳𝖉, the Great Mother, shook her stone chest when people forgot about sacrifices. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, although brave, felt for the first time in his life the deep fear of a man who understands how small he is in front of cosmic forces. He bent down to the ground, pressed his forehead to the ground, and whispered a short prayer. "Gods, do not be angry with me, the little shepherd. If this is your sign, show me the way." As the earthquake intensified, a crack began to open in the middle of the plain. First, a thin line, a scratch in the grass. But then, like a wound that widens under its own weight, the earth opened with a deafening crack. A deep black chasm yawned, swallowing the meadow and uprooting entire trees. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 stepped back, his eyes wide, watching as pieces of rock tumbled into the pit. A hot wind rose from the depths, mixed with a heavy smell of sulfur and scorched earth. It was as if the mouth of the world had opened, calling him towards something unknown. The earthquake lasted a few moments that seemed like an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The earth remained split, and silence fell again, a silence even stranger than before. The flock had scattered. But 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was not thinking about the sheep now. His eyes were fixed on the abyss that had gaped a few steps away from him. Its edges smoked lightly, as if the abyss held hidden fires within itself. An instinctive fear urged him to flee, to leave everything and run to the village, to tell the people that the gods had torn the earth. And yet, in his soul, another voice rose, curiosity. Why was this wound of the world shown to me? He asked himself. Why not to another? He slowly approached the edge of the abyss. He looked down and saw only darkness. But after a few moments, his eyes got used to it, and he distinguished the outlines of strange stones, perhaps ruins, perhaps rocks. It seemed to him that there, deep down, there was something hidden, something that had long been waiting to be discovered. He felt a call. It was not just his usual curiosity, but a kind of inner voice, a premonition that fate was pushing him towards the abyss. And while his heart was beating fast, he understood that if he left now, if he turned his back, he would live his whole life with the question, what was hidden there? The dogs barked and whined, as if trying to stop him. But 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt his steps carried forward, closer to the edge. He picked up a stone and threw it into the abyss. Its sound lasted for a long time, until finally he heard the echo of a deep blow. It was a huge pit, a wound in the earth that could not be explained. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 gathered his cloak, put his shepherd's staff behind his back, and decided he had to go down. Not out of madness, but out of that restlessness that had always made him look beyond appearances. If the gods had shown him this abyss, it meant that they were calling him to a destiny. He tied a rope to the trunk of a tree left on the edge and began to go down. The stones were slippery, and the air became heavier and heavier as he went deeper. The echo of his footsteps sounded like a huge heartbeat. From time to time, he looked up at the opening above, where the sky now seemed a small, distant disk. "Perhaps I am walking towards death," he said to himself, "but it is better to die knowing than to live not knowing." When he reached the bottom of the abyss, he discovered a natural corridor, like a cave carved into the rock. The air was warm and filled with unfamiliar smells. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 advanced slowly, feeling the damp walls vibrate slightly, as if they still held the memory of the earthquake, and there, deep within, he saw a pale light, like a diffuse glow coming from a larger hall. His heart lurched. He approached with measured steps, feeling that what he was about to see would change his life forever. The chasm was not just a wound in the earth. It was a gate to a secret hidden for thousands of years, to a power that no mortal should have touched. And so, the unexpected earthquake that had shaken the fields of Lydia had not been a simple phenomenon of nature. It was a divine sign that 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's destiny was beginning. Chapter 4. The Descent into the Depths. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 stood at the edge of the abyss, seized by a deep hesitation. Above him, the sky had shrunk into a pale disk, a sun slowly setting, letting the colors of twilight spread across the horizon. Behind him, the Lydian plain remained deserted, the flock scattered by the earthquake. In front of him, the dark chasm opened in the earth seemed to call to him with a mute but irresistible voice. Never had he felt so clearly that he stood between two worlds, the known, where there was only a shepherd, and the unknown, where his destiny was being prepared. He gathered his cloak around his shoulders and made his usual sign of prayer, touching his forehead and chest. "Gods, if this is your path, be with me." Then, without hesitation, he fastened his rope tightly around a tree trunk, and he descended slowly, step by step, into the deep abyss. The first moments of the descent seemed familiar to him. He had climbed rocks and entered caves before. But he quickly realized that this time it was different. The air was thick, almost hard to breathe. Warm steam rose from the walls of the crack, like a breath coming from the bowels of the world. Several times, the stones had come loose from under his feet, falling into the abyss with long echoes, and each noise made his heart jump. But fear was always accompanied by something stronger. curiosity. With each step, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt more drawn, as if an unseen force was pushing him forward. When he reached the bottom of the abyss, he found himself in a wide corridor, dug into the rock. It was hard to tell whether those shapes were the work of nature or man's hand. The walls were smooth in places, with chisel marks, and the ceiling arched above like a high vault. On the floor, the stones were warm, almost as if they had preserved the fire of an ancient volcano. He moved forward, slowly, feeling the walls. The darkness was thick, but his eyes gradually became accustomed, and the distance, a faint glow was visible, a pale yellow light, like a dying ember. "That's where I must go," he said to himself, gripping his staff tightly. As he drew closer, he discovered that the light came from strange crystals embedded in the walls. They emanated a diffuse glow, as if they had gathered the sun's rays and kept them hidden in the depths. The entire cave had taken on a spectral light, enough to see the shapes rising around it, and then he saw them, huge columns, crudely carved but imposing, supporting the stone ceiling. There was no doubt that this place had been worked by human hands, but hands from long ago, from a forgotten era. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt a shiver run down his spine. Legend spoke of vanished civilizations, of giants and long-forgotten kings. Perhaps he had entered an ancient tomb, hidden underground to keep unimaginable secrets, and in the middle of the room stood a huge sarcophagus, carved from black stone. The lid was decorated with bas-reliefs, figures of people fighting beasts, symbols of the sun and moon, spirals and lines that seemed to represent the movement of the stars. The entire room seemed a sanctuary of mystery. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 approached slowly, his breath caught. Around the sarcophagus, the ground was strewn with bones and fragments of rusty weapons. It was as if a battle had once taken place there, or perhaps those remains were the guards who had guarded the tomb. Made his prayer sign again, but in his soul there was no fear of death, but of the unknown. He felt the sarcophagus with his hand. Cold stone, but smooth. He ran his fingers over the symbols and felt how a strange energy seemed to pulse from them. Was it just his imagination? Chapter 5. The Giant's Tomb. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 stood frozen in front of the sarcophagus. The earthquake had thrown him into the depths, the darkness had carried him through stone corridors, but now he had the impression that he had reached the true destination of his journey. Everything he had seen until then seemed only a preparation for the present moment. The task of facing death and mystery was much harder than the descent itself, and in front of him, the immense black sarcophagus seemed to breathe a cold and solemn air, like an altar erected for a fallen god. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 approached with small steps. The weak light of the carved crystals in the walls danced on the surface of the stone, giving the illusion that the bas-reliefs were moving. He saw figures of people, gods, and fantastic animals, all caught in a whirlwind of lines and spirals. It seemed to him that those symbols were not simple ornaments, but an unknown language, a story engraved for those who had the courage to look. Touching those shapes with his fingers, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt a strange vibration. Cold stone, but full of energy, as if his hand had awakened the shadows of those who had raised the tomb. Remembered the stories told by the village elders at the campfire, legends about the race of giants who had lived on earth before men. The gods, fearing their power, had struck them down, burying their bodies in the depths. Where the earth trembled, there lay the forgotten colossi. "I have found the tomb of one of them," 𝕽𝖎𝖓 thought. Feeling his blood freeze in his veins, he gathered all his strength and pushed the massive lid open. A dull creak filled the hall, and the stone moved slowly, as if it had endured centuries of silence. A wave of stale air hit his face, bringing with it the heavy smell of antiquity. His gaze sank into the darkness of the sarcophagus, and gradually he saw the outlines. First the fragments of armor, massive plates, now covered in green and red rust, but still suggesting the greatness of a warrior. Then the bones, white but huge, disproportionate to a human body. The skull had deep sockets, like two empty caves, and the large teeth, still embedded in the jaw, made it look like a beast. The skeleton was lying with his hands on his chest, in a position of eternal sleep, but in that solemn silence, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 had the impression that the giant could open his eyes at any time. Never had he felt the weight of time so strongly. Before him was a body that had slept for thousands of years, witness to eras that people no longer knew. But what immediately caught his eye was the colossus's right hand. On its bony finger shone a golden ring, intact, untouched by the passage of time. While the armor and bones had been worn away by time, the jewel seemed new, as if it had just been forged. It was a massive ring, with a large black stone, which, when reflected in the light of the crystals, sparkled with greenish flashes. It was not a simple ornament, it seemed a sacred object, a seal of power. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 remained motionless, his hands trembling. He felt the attraction of that ornament, but also an almost animalistic fear. "If I touch it, I will be cursed," he thought. "But what if this is a gift? What if the gods have brought it my way?" A fierce battle was raging in his soul, and in the silence of the cave, he heard a faint murmur, like a whistling wind, or maybe it was just the beating of his heart in his ears. However, a strange sensation arose in his mind, as if the grave were whispering to him. Not clear words, but a call, an urge. "Take it, pick it up, it's yours." He approached, with heavy steps, and extended his hand. His fingers had touched the cold bone, which crumbled like dust. The ring slipped easily, as if he had been waiting for that moment for ages. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 picked it up and looked at it for a long time. It was heavy, but not like an ordinary object, but like a burden. The stone inside it pulsed weakly, like a hidden heart. For a moment, he felt the desire to leave it there, not to wear it. But something else, an unseen power, pushed his thoughts towards the fatal gesture. He put the ring on his finger. That moment, a warmth spread in his palm. Going up his arm, he felt a shiver that went through his body, and a deep echo was heard in the air, like muffled thunder. He looked at his hands, and saw that they had disappeared. He was scared. Jumping, he fell over the rocks, dropping his staff, but when he raised his arms again, they were empty. He was invisible. A wave of fear swept over him. But after a few moments, the fear turned to amazement and then to something more dangerous. He, a simple shepherd, now carried a power that no king possessed. He took off his ring, and his body reappeared. He put it back on, and it disappeared. It was real. That object had the power to hide him from the eyes of the world. He stood up, his heart pounding madly. He looked back at the giant skeleton. He imagined who he had been. Perhaps a king of an extinct race, perhaps a punished demigod. And he thought, perhaps he, like me, had worn the ring. Perhaps he had lost this power. A shiver of doubt ran through him. What if the ring was cursed? What if his power attracted destruction? But at the same time, another, stronger voice answered in his mind, "You have been chosen. You will carry on the legacy. You will rule the unseen world." He slowly retreated from the sarcophagus. The tomb no longer seemed like a simple crypt, but a sanctuary in which a new destiny had been born. The giant had been sleeping for thousands of years, but his ring lived, finding a new master. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 felt that he was no longer the same man. The shepherd who had descended into the abyss had died there, in front of the bones of the Colossus. In his place, someone else was being born, a man who carried the secret of invisibility, a man who could break any law without being caught. He looked up at the thin strip of sky above. The way back seemed long, but his heart was lighter than ever. He gathered his cloak, wrapped his staff around his back, and set off back toward the light. Behind him, the sarcophagus stood open, the giant asleep and empty of his last secret. The cave seemed to sigh, as if it knew that an era had ended. But for 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉, everything was just beginning. Chapter 6. The Golden Ring. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 stopped at the edge of the inner abyss, where the light of the crystals mixed with the heavy shadows. He held the ring he had found on the sleeping giant's finger in his hand, had taken it off, and put it back on several times, as if to convince himself that he was not dreaming. Every time the black stone touched his skin, he felt a cold shiver, but also a strange calling. The gold was crafted with a mastery he had never seen before. It did not resemble the simple jewelry of the Lydian nobles, nor the talismans of sorcerers. It was a perfect circle, made of solid metal, heavy and cold. The stone encrusted in it, a dark gem with greenish reflections, seemed to pulse, like a hidden heart in the weak light. It gave the impression of absorbing the brilliance, as if it had nourished it in its depths. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 held his breath and turned it on all sides. Strange engravings covered the inner sides, spiral lines, unknown letters, shapes resembling stars and waves. It seemed that the object had not been made for beauty, but for a much higher purpose. He looked at it with distrust. He wanted to believe that it was nothing more than an ancient ornament, a vestige of a vanished race. However, the experience he had had when he had tried it on for the first time followed him with an intensity that could not be explained by mere imagination. He remembered how his arms had disappeared into nothingness, how the air around him had become different, as if the whole world refused him to look. That incident could not be an illusion. The power of the ring was real. "What kind of gift is this?" he wondered in a faint voice, while the echo repeated his words through the stone corridors. "And why me?" He took it out and placed it on his left palm. He looked at it again, trying to decipher the engravings. But the symbols remained hidden to him, as if they were written in a language that only the gods understood. Walking slowly, he left the tomb hall and started down the narrow corridor he had come from. Each step now seemed heavier, as if he was carrying not just an object, but a burden. He felt that, with the ring, he had taken upon himself a legacy that was thousands of years old. He reached an opening, where a ray of light penetrated through a crack in a rock. He sat there, breathing deeply the cold air. He tried it again, put it on his finger, twisted it gently, and suddenly his body was lost in nothingness. Looking at his invisible hand, a tremor seized him. It was frightening and at the same time dizzying, felt the blood rushing through his veins. For a moment, he was tempted to run back to the tomb and leave the ring there, to bury that secret forever. But another voice, stronger and more alluring, held him back. "This is your gift," the darkness seemed to whisper to him. "No one knows, no one can stop you. Now you are free." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 closed his eyes. Images ran through his mind, the flocks of shepherds, the harsh words of the royal overseers, the hunger and cold of winter, the injustices to which simple people like him had been subjected. If he had worn this ring, who could have prevented him from taking what he wanted? Who could have commanded him to do anything? But at the same time, other thoughts troubled him. What if the gods were watching him? What if the ring was a test meant to reveal his true heart? He took off the ring and put it on his chest. It felt cold as ice, but inside it burned an unseen flame. That night, sheltered in a cave, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 could not sleep. He looked at his fingers, remembered the shine of the stone, and his thoughts would not give him peace. He tried it again and again, as if he had to make sure that the power was real. Each attempt brought him the same result. He disappeared from the world, like a shadow slipping into nothingness. Fear slowly began to give way to another emotion. Curiosity. Then, curiosity turned into desire. It was no longer just about understanding, but about feeling the taste of power. What if he slipped into the village, invisible, to see the people without being seen? What if he could enter the king's palace, listen to the secrets of the court? The possibilities multiplied in his mind, like a shower of sparks. But every time he imagined these things, he felt a stab in his heart, a warning, like a whisper from an unseen world. Power attracts destruction. In the morning, when the light penetrated through the rocks, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt changed. The simple shepherd of yesterday no longer existed in his place. A man had been born who carried a secret greater than any treasure on his finger. He looked at his flocks, calmly, grazing in the green fields. He realized that modest life, which until then he had led obediently, could no longer be enough for him. The ring had changed him. He still did not know in what way. Perhaps to greatness, perhaps to ruin. But he knew that he was no longer free to return to his old life. And the following days, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 wore the ring hidden, but he felt it always present. With every gesture, with every step, he reminded her that he was there, ready to grant her invisibility. Several times he used it in small trials. He hid from the other shepherds. He slipped unseen among the flocks. He followed discussions without being seen. He did it cautiously, with a childish fear. Then, with increasing pleasure, he discovered secrets. He surprised people who showed their faces that they would not have shown otherwise. He understood how fragile everyday life was, how much it relied on the idea that the gazes of others were watching us. But now he was learning a terrible truth, that once the veil of visibility was broken, the laws no longer had power. And yet, every evening, when he was alone, a doubt gnawed at him. He felt that he was on the edge of an abyss, that the ring was a double-edged sword. It gave him strength, but it could steal his soul. He remembered the face of the giant in the sarcophagus, his bony hand clutching the same ring. Perhaps he had had the same premonitions. Perhaps he had set out on his journey with good intentions, but had ended up under the stone, a lifeless skeleton. Perhaps this is the destiny of all those who wear the ring, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 told himself. To be masters for a while and then fall prey to their own power. But when he looked at his finger again, with the golden circle shining on it, he felt a wave of confidence. I will not be like the others, I will be stronger. Thus was born in 𝕽𝖎𝖓's heart the first contradiction, between fear and desire, between foreboding of doom and the thirst to try the impossible. The ring had given him not only invisibility, but also a mirror of his soul. It brought him face to face with his own nature, with hidden desires and with temptations that had not yet had a voice. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 did not yet know where this path would take him, but he felt that every step taken with the ring on his finger would bring him closer to a crossroads from which he could no longer turn. And, somewhere deep in his being, a small flame burned, the desire to face that crossroads, even at the risk of losing his soul. Chapter 7. Returning Home. The sun was slowly setting over the Lydian plains, painting the sky in reddish hues, when 𝕽𝖎𝖓 emerged from the depths. After the days spent in the darkness of the abyss, the light seemed brighter than ever. He took a deep breath, with a feeling of rebirth, but also of burden. He still wore the ring on his finger, shining faintly in the rays of the setting sun. He tried to tell himself that it was just a simple object, a vestige found by chance. However, somewhere deep in his soul he knew, nothing that had happened to him was by chance. The road to the village found him silent and lonely. The landscape seemed changed to him, although it was the same vast field, with scattered flocks and the small shepherds' houses dotted on the hills. His eyes no longer looked at the world as before. Every sound of the wind, every rustle of grass reminded him of the mysteries beneath the earth, the sleeping giant, and the power that now pulsed on his finger. The closer he got to the house, the more the ring seemed to make. Itself felt 𝕳𝖎𝖉 was not a physical weight, but a presence, as if he carried it not only in his flesh and blood, but also in his soul. Sometimes he felt that the ring was watching him, like an eye hidden in the black stone. Sometimes he whispered to him, although he could not make out the words. The village greeted him with the same usual routine. Children ran barefoot through the fields, women fetched water from the well. Men shouted after the animals. No one suspected what he had brought with him. Oh, everyone else, 𝕽𝖎𝖉𝖉 was just a poor shepherd, the young man with curious eyes who spent his days among the flocks. But he knew that he was no longer the same. His mother, a woman with gray hair and hard-working hands, hugged him with joy. She asked him where he had been, because he had been absent more than usual the past few days. 𝕽𝖎𝖉 smiled, but he did not tell the truth. He spoke of the earthquake and the lost flocks, of how he had been trapped between the rocks. He hid the truth, not because he wanted to lie, but because he felt that no one would understand him. That night, when the village fell asleep, 𝕽𝖎𝖉𝖉 sat on the porch and looked at the starry sky. He slowly rotated the ring on his finger, with a mixture of fear and fascination. When the stone turned at a certain angle, his body disappeared from his own eyes, and the world around him enveloped him as if it no longer existed. He quickly took out the ring, his heart beating wildly. He still couldn't get used to that terrifying miracle. "I'm just a shepherd," he told himself, trying to calm himself down. "It's not my place to carry such power." But immediately another, more tempting thought arose. Perhaps the ring was chosen just for me. Perhaps this is my destiny. The days passed, and 𝕽𝖎𝖉𝖉 tried to continue his life as before, took his flocks to pasture, repaired huts, listened to the stories of the elders. But the ring stole his peace. Every time he met a man, he wondered what it would be like to look at him invisibly, to hear his hidden thoughts, to find out the secrets that each one carries. He tried to push these thoughts away, but they returned. The power, once known, could not be forgotten. The ring was a constant temptation, a silent voice that pushed him towards the unknown. Once, during a gathering on the outskirts of the village, he felt the desire to try it again. He gently turned his stone and disappeared. He walked among the gathered people, invisible, and for the first time he saw how they spoke with a freed that they never showed in front of him. Some laughed at his naivety, others confided their thoughts about the king and the rulers. 𝕽𝖎𝖉𝖉 understood then how many faces a man has and how little truth is revealed to the light. He suddenly reappeared, frightened by his own courage. Those around him suspected nothing, but his heart was beating like a drummer in his chest. He realized that he had experienced something irreversible. It was no longer possible to forget what he had seen. Another day, while he was driving a flock of sheep, he met a supervisor of King 𝕽𝖎𝖓. The man treated him with contempt, threw harsh words at him, and threatened him with a whip. Normally, 𝕽𝖎𝖉𝖉 would have swallowed the humiliation, but now his hand jerked toward the ring. He touched it, and for a moment the image of disappearing and punishing the unseen overseer came to mind. But he stopped, trembling. Was the first time the thought of murder had crossed his mind. He quickly pushed it away, but its trace remained. He understood that the ring not only gave him invisibility, but also the crazy courage to dare what would have been unthinkable before. In the evening, at home, his mother noticed the change. She told him that his eyes were different, that he always seemed lost in thought. 𝕽𝖎𝖉𝖉 smiled and reassured her, but a struggle was deepening in his soul. Between the simple man he had been and the one who was beginning to be born, his dreams were filled with strange images. He saw the giant in the sarcophagus rising and calling him. He saw the vast kingdom of Lydia collapsing in flames. He saw a golden crown on his head. He woke up scared, but also with a strange anxiety, as if the future was speaking to him through signs. One morning, 𝕽𝖎𝖉𝖉 looked into his mother's bronze mirror. His face was the same, but something new was visible in his gaze, a radiance cold, of a man who knows more than the others. He realized that he was wearing a secret that could not be shared. And with the secret, a distance was dug between him and other people. He was no longer just a shepherd. He was the bearer of an object that could overturn the order of the world. And even though he tried to tell himself that he would never use that power for evil, deep down he knew that the temptation was becoming harder to defeat every day. Thus, returning home did not bring him the peace he had dreamed of. The village, the family, the simple life could no longer be his shelter. The ring, shining silently on his finger, linked him to a destiny greater than anything and pushed him slowly but surely on a path of no return. 𝕽𝖎𝖉𝖉 wore the ring as a burden and as a blessing, did not yet know what was hidden in it, but he had a feeling that it was only the beginning. And somewhere, in the depths of the quiet nights of Lydia, the gods watched and waited to see which path he would take. Choose the shepherd who became master of invisibility. Chapter 8. The Mystery of Invisibility. At the dawn of a clear morning, 𝕽𝖎𝖉𝖉 woke up earlier than usual. The wind blew gently over the fields of Lydia, and the flocks were still sleeping, huddled in their pens. Sleep had brought him no rest, but disturbing dreams, in which the black stone of the ring pulsed like a living heart. Although he tried to push these thoughts away, his hand instinctively slid to the finger on which he wore the golden circle. He looked at it for a long time, as if for the first time he dared to truly study it. The ring was not just a simple ornament. Its gold seemed to be worked with unprecedented care, and the dark, almost opaque stone seemed to absorb the morning light. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 felt that strange unease again, as if the object was looking at him and weighing him down. "What are you?" he whispered, not realizing he was speaking out loud. At the same moment, a strange sensation ran through his arm. It was not pain, but a twisting, like a cold wind passing through flesh and blood. Without understanding why, he turned the stone of the ring to the inside of his palm. And then it happened. His body disappeared. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 looked down, but he could no longer see his feet. He raised his hands, but they were no longer there. He bent over a nearby pond and was stunned. The mirror of the water no longer showed his face. The meadow was empty, as if he had not been there. His heart was beating wildly. He turned suddenly, thinking he was dreaming, but the world was the same. Only he had disappeared from it first. Fear gripped him, felt that he was in a state against nature, that the gods were looking at him with frowning eyes, for that he had entered a forbidden mystery. He fell to his knees, trembling, trying to pull the ring from his finger. But the ring would not fall. The gold seemed glued to his flesh, as if it had merged with his body. In desperation, he twisted it again, and then, like rising steam, his body reappeared in the puddle in front of him. He saw his pale face and his wide-open eyes, full of horror and amazement. He was breathing deeply, as if he had come out of the water after being about to drown. For a few moments he remained still. He could feel his flesh and bones, and yet something inside him had changed irrevocably. He told himself that it had been a hallucination, an illusion born of fatigue and fear. But the temptation consumed him. He turned the stone again. It disappeared. This time, he was not so scared. He remained for a few moments invisible, watching the world around him. The birds chirped unhindered, and the village dogs ran through the fields without sensing his presence. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 picked up a stick from below and let it fall. The sound was heard, but the hand that had dropped it was unseen. "It is true," he whispered, although no one could hear him. "I am not dreaming." He felt his heart beating like a war drum, but instead of fear, a strange excitement began to grow within him. It was as if he had discovered a gateway to a different existence. When he returned to visibility, his legs were shaking. He knew he could tell no one, not even his mother, not even his best friends. Who would have believed it? Who would have dared not to be afraid of a man who could disappear and reappear at will? That same day, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 decided to try his strength again. He took his flocks to pasture, but this time he could not focus his mind on them. His thoughts were only on the ring. When a stray ram approached the edge of the forest, he crept after it and, avoiding the gaze of the other shepherds, turned the stone. Suddenly, the dogs that accompanied him stopped in bewilderment, sniffing the air. The ram turned in all directions, as if sensing an unseen danger. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉, invisible, reached out and touched its rough fur. The animal jumped in terror and ran towards the flock. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 burst into a roar of laughter, but his laughter remained suspended in the air, as if it came from a bodiless place. Returning to visibility, he sat down on a boulder and held his forehead in his hands. "This is not just a gift," he told himself. "It is a weapon, power that no mortal has ever had." And in that moment he understood. From now on, nothing could stop him from penetrating the secrets of the world. And the following days, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 used the ring more and more often. First, just out of curiosity, he would enter the villagers' huts unseen and listen to stories that he would never have heard otherwise. He discovered that some spoke ill of him, saying that he was too curious and dreamy. Others shared their pains and worries, things they would never say out loud. Each experience shook him. He began to understand that people were full of masks and lies. Those who smiled friendly by day spoke words of envy and malice by night. Those who showed themselves humble secretly coveted wealth and power. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 felt caught between two worlds, the visible world of appearances and the invisible world of hidden truths. And more often he asked himself, which of them was real? One evening, drawn by an impulse he could not explain, he walked invisibly to the house of the king's overseer, the same one who had insulted him days before. The man was sitting with his family, telling stories about the royal court, about the riches he had seen. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉, unseen, looked at him for a long time. He could have broken his neck right then and there, and no one would ever know who had done it. The thought shook him. He stepped back and twisted his stone to become visible again. The air seemed heavier, as if sin itself had enveloped him for a moment. But a truth was taking root in his mind. If he wanted to, he could do anything. And this anything was beginning to shake his soul. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was no longer the simple boy who had spent his days among the herds. In just a few days, he felt like he had lived entire lives. The ring had changed him. It had shown him a reality in which the laws of men no longer had power over him. Who could punish a man who could not be seen? Who could stop the desires of one who could sneak anywhere, who could steal, listen, kill without being discovered? And yet, in his heart, a part resisted. His father's voice, his mother's voice, the memory of the pure days of childhood told him that justice could not be changed by a ring. But the voice of temptation was stronger. Every moment, the ring whispered to him, "Try again. Discover again. Dare again." One night, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 got out of bed and went outside. The moon lit the fields, and the village was sleeping. He turned his stone and became invisible. He walked among the quiet houses, touching gates, stones, huts. He felt like a ghost of the night, a spirit that no longer belonged to people. For the first time, he no longer felt fear, but pleasure. The freedom of invisibility was dizzying. He was no longer a poor shepherd, but a master of secrets, a man chosen by fate. When he returned home, dawn was near. He took off his ring and looked at it in silence. "You are not just an object," he whispered. "You are the key to a path I must discover." And so, his first encounter with the true power of the ring was not just a discovery, but the beginning of a metamorphosis. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 could never be the same again. Chapter 9. The Dangerous Game. The days that followed the discovery of invisibility flowed for 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 in a mixture of fear, fascination, and pure delight. His simple life as a shepherd could no longer keep up with the new desires that had awakened in him. Invisibility opened up horizons for him that he had never dared to dream of. First, everything was a game. Each experiment brought him an emotion so intense that it took his breath away. He would wake up before sunrise, feel the cold morning air, and, with the ring clenched between his fingers, he would slip among the sleeping flocks. He would become invisible and could observe the world as he had never seen it before, without judgmental glances, without rules that constrained him. The flocks grazed peacefully, and 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt like a spirit of the meadows. But his joy was more than just a walk, and every day, he found something new, something hidden from the eyes of others. He discovered the hidden conversations of the villagers, the small conflicts between children, the secrets of the merchants, the fears of women, and the dreams of men. Every gesture, every whisper became a lesson in human nature. And the more he observed, the more he began to understand the fragility of the visible world and how much people depend on appearances and the fear of being seen. One morning, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 crept into the courtyard of an old man who guarded the village's flocks. The old man whispered prayers, speaking in a low voice about the poor harvest and the hard times. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, invisible, watched him. Fascinated, it was his first contact with the fragility and sincere faith of 𝕳𝖎𝖉𝖊𝖓. His experiment was not just a game. It was an exploration of the inner world, of the truths that people hide from others. But curiosity carried him beyond observation. One day, he entered invisibly into the pantry of a village merchant, who was hiding food and gold from the eyes of others. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, amused, played with the objects without anyone noticing him. He shook them, moved them, made light noises to see if anyone would react. It was a dangerous game, a test of his power, of the absolute freedom that the ring offered. As the days passed, he experimented more and more. He imagined scenarios, hid behind huts, removed the physical and moral obstacles that once held him in place. He was amused to see how people spoke freely about things that they would otherwise have hidden. Without knowing he was there, he learned more and more about their fears and desires, and with each discovery, his sense of power grew within him. One evening, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 crept invisibly to the village well. People were collecting water, discussing the weather and the harvest, unaware that an unseen eye was watching them. Felt like an invisible god, but for the first time aware that this gift came with an unseen responsibility. But he enjoyed absolute freedom. That moment, his experiment was not just play. It was a revelation of what it means to be completely free. The play continued in his encounters with the other shepherds. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 disappeared and reappeared in unexpected places, changing things invisibly, making jokes about his colleagues without being caught. He was amused with an intensity he had never felt before. His laughter, unseen, seemed to fill the air with a strange magic, an emotion that was neither fear nor malice, just the pure joy of total freedom. But with each experiment, he also discovered the temptation to exceed moral boundaries. He imagined how he could break into people's homes to steal, to listen to secrets, to manipulate situations. The temptation was strong, but so far 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 had stopped, amused by the game, without committing any evil deed. One night, curiosity led him to the house of a neighbor who was stealing food from the villagers. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, invisibly, watched every gesture, understanding more about the hidden desire and the fear of being caught. For the first time, he felt that his power could allow him to intervene. The thought of stopping the theft crossed his mind, but he stopped, aware of the danger of abusing his gift. This limit, however, was fragile. With each experiment, with each joke or hidden glance, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 learned how easily it could be crossed. The freedom that the ring offered was dizzying, and the first signs of moral corruption slowly crept into his soul. In another experiment, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 crept invisibly to the house of King Candaules. He observed for the first time the splendor of the palace, the secrets of the court, and the tensions between the nobles. He imagined how he could gather information, how he could influence situations without anyone knowing. He felt for the first time the taste of absolute power. But with this taste came and fear. He understood that any wrong step could bring about his doom. The power of invisibility was not just a gift, it was a double-edged sword. But the temptation to explore further was irresistible. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 began to understand the truth about people. Everyone smiles, but hides desires and fears. Invisibility allowed him to discover them. And he, young and brave, began to feel that he could be more than a simple shepherd. In the days that followed, the dangerous game turned into a routine. Each day began with a test of invisibility, with a new discovery, with a little adventure. Each evening, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 returned home tired, but full of delight. The freedom he felt was intoxicating, but deep down, a small voice warned him, "Be careful. Not all power can be carried without consequences." Nevertheless, the young shepherd continued to play. Invisibility gave him wings, but every step tested his soul. In every experiment, in every hidden joke, he learned more about the world, about people, but also about himself. Freedom was wonderful, but the first shadows of temptation began to show, preparing him for darker paths. Thus, during this period of dangerous play, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 discovered two essential things. The power of invisibility offered him absolute freedom, but at the same time, it provoked his first moral trials. Freedom was seductive, but behind every hidden gesture there was a choice, and every choice brought him closer to a crossroads from which he could no longer turn. Invisibility was not just a gift, it was a test, and 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, young and curious, was playing with fire. Chapter 10. The Forbidden Temptation. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt the ring singing in his blood. Days of dangerous play had given him courage, but also an awareness of his power. Until then, he had experimented with invisibility for fun or to observe hidden things. But that day, something changed. Strange tension hung in the air, as if the earth itself was whispering to him that what he held in his hand was not just a gift, but a force that could change the fate of the world. The sun was slowly rising over Lydia, its light penetrating through the foliage of the trees, but 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was not looking at it. His eyes were fixed on the palace of King Candaules. In the distance, thousand thoughts gathered in his mind. Knew that if he wore the ring and became invisible, no one could stop him. Not guards, not soldiers, not the law. "If no one could catch me," 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 muttered, in a low voice. These words, spoken to himself, were the beginning of a temptation greater than any experiment until then. Invisibility was now becoming more than a game. It was a test of hidden desires. He slipped through the trees, invisible, approaching the king's palace and front of the imposing gates. He felt for the first time the sensation of absolute power. Every step he took was free from human gaze. Every gesture could be hidden. No one could observe him, no one could stop him. Looking into the palace courtyard, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 saw people laughing, plotting and flaunting their wealth without fear. All this caused him a shiver. That moment, for the first time, he understood how fragile the world order was and how easily it could be violated. He stopped and imagined what he could do. Steal treasures, hide important documents, listen to state secrets, or even influence the king's decisions without anyone suspecting him. All this seemed possible to him, but at the same time, forbidden. As he wandered invisibly through the courtyard, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt the first contradictory emotions: fascination, fear, but also a deep excitement. The power was dizzying. For the first time, he thought of himself not as a simple shepherd, but as a man who he could transform his own destiny and control the destiny of others. Every object, every closed door, every hidden gesture offered him an opportunity. In a way, the ring had become a mirror of his own will. At every moment, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt his desires, even those he had hidden until then, being revealed with disturbing clarity. And the more he imagined, the more the temptation grew. He asked himself, if no one can catch me, what would stop me from doing whatever I want? If no one can punish me, what harm would it do to try? The first major temptation came in the form of the queen. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, invisible, saw her crossing the palace courtyard, unaware that his gaze was following her. Without her noticing, he observed every gesture, every expression. The queen's eyes were full of grace, but also vulnerability. For the first time, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt that invisibility offered him not only freedom, but also control over the lives of others. He stopped, trembling, knew that if he dared to approach, to intervene in the queen's life or to follow her gestures, he would be violating moral boundaries that he had respected until then. But the temptation was almost unbearable. Every fiber of his being told him that he could do whatever he wanted, without consequences. That moment, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 understood a dangerous truth. The ring was not only a weapon, but also a mirror of his soul. What he did or did not do in the face of temptation defined him, and the following days, the young shepherd tested his power in increasingly daring ways. Invisibly, he penetrated rooms, observed secret conversations, learned the secrets of nobles. He felt like a hidden god. But with each experiment, he began to perceive the first shadows of corruption. The first time he stole a valuable object from a noble house, he felt neither remorse nor fear. Only pure fascination. He understood that if no one could catch him, the world would become a playground for his desires. However, each act shook him inside. He knew that what he was doing was forbidden, but absolute freedom made him feel immortal. He imagined how he could change the course of events in the kingdom, influence decisions, manipulate people without anyone knowing him. The temptation reached its climax when 𝕽𝖎𝖓 slipped into the throne room. The king was away, but the rooms were full of advisors and scribes. For the first time, he felt how simple it would be to intervene, to gather information, to commit acts that, if seen, would be punishable by death. Faced with infinite possibilities, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt the dizzying mixture of fear and power. The ring had transformed him not only into invisible, but also into the master of his desires. That moment, the young shepherd fully understood. Absolute freedom was not a priceless gift. It was a moral challenge, a test of his heart and character. But 𝕽𝖎𝖓 did not stop. He experienced every limit, testing how far he could go without being caught. Invisible, he could penetrate anywhere, he could listen anywhere, he could influence anywhere. With each step, he felt stronger, but also more fragile in the face of his own temptation. He wondered, if he used the ring to take the crown, to destroy enemies, or to become king of the kingdom, who could stop him? Nobody, and the thought gave him a thrill of power. At the same time, however, the inner voice warned him, every wrong step will mark your soul. Every act of corruption will leave a shadow on you. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 understood that temptation was not just about doing what could not be stopped, but about choosing between his desires and what he knew was right. Invisibility freed him from the eyes of the world, but not from his own conscience. And the evening, when he returned to the village, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt a strange fatigue. The freedom had been intoxicating, but the moral tension had left him exhausted. He took off his ring, looked at it for a long time, and whispered, "You are more than an object. You are the key to a path that I do not know if I am allowed to walk on." That night, he fell asleep thinking about the power he carried on his finger. He knew that the forbidden temptation was only the beginning, that each experiment brought him closer to a crossroads. Invisibility offered him freedom, but it also tested his soul. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 could no longer be a simple shepherd. Not after discovering how easily the law can be broken, how fragile moral boundaries are, and how strong a man can be when no one can catch him. And so, the young shepherd understood the first painful lesson of the ring. Absolute freedom brings absolute temptations, and every choice will define him and his destiny. Chapter 11. Meeting with Destiny. At the dawn of a golden morning, the village where 𝕽𝖎𝖓 lived continued its usual, simple and predictable rhythm. Shepherds drove their flocks to the hills, women purred near the houses, and children played in the dust of the road. Everything seemed to unfold the same as any other day, but for 𝕽𝖎𝖓, time would flow differently. Destiny, like an invisible hand, was preparing to tear him from pastoral anonymity and throw him into the whirlpool of history. As he watered his flock at the spring, a messenger from the king appeared in the distance. Riding a white horse, with a purple cloak fluttering in the wind, the messenger attracted the attention of the villagers. No one expected a royal envoy to arrive in those modest places. The people crowded together curiously, whispering among themselves, while the messenger's eyes they were looking for the young shepherd. "Which one of you is 𝕽𝖎𝖓?" shouted the messenger, in a loud voice. A shiver ran through 𝕽𝖎𝖓. His name spoken by a stranger, and not by just anyone, but by a messenger from King Cendal's, caused him an uneasiness that was hard to describe. He stood up slowly and took a step forward, trying to hide his emotion. "I am," he replied. The messenger looked at him for a long time, as if he wanted to search his soul, then dismounted. "King Cendal's calls you to court, young shepherd. It is his desire to see you immediately." The words fell like a sentence. The villagers murmured in amazement. A simple shepherd, summoned to the king's palace. No one understood the reason. But for 𝕽𝖎𝖓, who wore the ring hidden on his finger, the news was shocking. Was it a coincidence, or a consequence of his recent deeds, when he had ventured invisibly through the palace courtyards? The road to Sardis, the capital of Lydia, seemed endless to him. As he rode alongside the ground, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 looked at the hills, rivers, and plains as if he were seeing them for the last time as a free man. His thoughts were troubled by questions. Has the king learned something? Has he sensed that I was close? Or has fate decided that I must step into the palace to discover my calling? When the walls of Sardis rose in the distance, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 was speechless. He had never seen such splendor before. Tall towers, shining roofs, squares filled with people from all corners of the world. It was a completely different world from the quiet of the shepherd's hills. The king's palace dominated the city like a stone god. White marble columns, gilded gates, and lush gardens stretched before his eyes. Everything breathed power and opulence. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt that he was stepping on sacred ground, where every mistake could be fatal. Arriving in the inner courtyard, the shepherd was led by 2 guards through long and ornate corridors. Frescoes of gods and heroes decorated the walls, and the floors were covered with mosaics depicting scenes of glory and conquest. Everything seemed designed to impress and intimidate. Finally, the great doors of the throne room opened. A bright light blinded him for a moment. A moment passed, and 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt his steps becoming heavier, and in front of him, on his golden throne, stood King 𝕽𝖎𝖓, a middle-aged man with a piercing gaze and an enigmatic smile. Around him, the court nobles looked at him curiously, wondering who the young man summoned from an obscure village was. "Come closer, 𝕽𝖎𝖓, the king said in a warm but authoritative voice. With his heart beating in his chest like a war drum, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 advanced. He felt the weight of the gazes of dozens of people, each analyzing him, judging him. He knelt before the throne, as tradition required, and bowed his head. "Get up, shepherd," said 𝕽𝖎𝖓. "I have heard much about you." 𝕽𝖎𝖓 looked up, surprised. "What could the king have heard about me?" he asked himself. "You have a reputation for being brave and extremely attentive to his surroundings. I was told that you had witnessed divine signs recently, the earthquake, the gaping chasm, and that you had descended into the depths. Is that true?" The question took his breath away. How could the king know? He remembered the moment when he had entered the chasm and discovered the giant's sarcophagus. He felt his palms sweating, but he could not deny it. "It is true, great king," 𝕽𝖎𝖓 replied. "I have seen with my own eyes the tomb hidden in the bowels of the earth." A murmur passed through the throne room. The nobles looked at each other, some with distrust, others with fear. The discovery of an ancient relic was considered a sign from the gods. "And what did you find there?" the king continued, leaning slightly. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt the ring on his finger, hidden under his sleeve. His heart told him to be silent, but his mind shouted that any hesitation could arouse suspicion. "A sarcophagus, your majesty, and a golden ring," he answered, in a barely audible voice. A heavy silence fell over the room. All eyes were fixed on 𝕽𝖎𝖓. The king smiled, but his smile was mysterious, hard to read. "A ring, you say?" 𝕽𝖎𝖓 asked. "And do you carry it with you?" 𝕽𝖎𝖓 nodded. Feeling how fate tightened his noose, he took out his hand and let the ring be seen. The shine of the gold filled the room with a strange thrill. "Interesting," the king murmured. "Very interesting." The audience did not end there. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 asked him to stay in the palace for a few days. Officially, the reason was to learn more about his discovery. Unofficially, however, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt that the king viewed him as an important piece in a larger game that he did not yet understand. In those days, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 had the opportunity to observe the court up close. He saw intrigues, fragile alliances, suspicious glances between nobles. Power, he realized, was a wild animal that could only be tamed by cunning or force. The king, in turn, seemed fascinated by him. He often called him to discussions, making him tell in detail about the tomb and what he had felt there. Sometimes, 𝕽𝖎𝖓's gaze would insistently fall on the ring, as if he knew more about its power than he admitted. One evening, as the sunset colored the sky in shades of purple, the king called him to his private room. 𝕽𝖎𝖓, said 𝕽𝖎𝖓, I believe the gods have chosen you for something great. It is no coincidence that you, a simple shepherd, have discovered a hidden tomb and a ring. These are signs of destiny. The young man listened to him, but in his heart fear and fascination mingled. He was flattered by the king's words, but he also felt the danger. I will tell you something that I have not told even my closest advisors, continued 𝕽𝖎𝖓. The kings of Lydia have always been protected by divine signs. Perhaps you are the next such sign. Perhaps the gods have sent you here to support me, or to show me the way. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 did not answer, knew that any inappropriate word could tip the scales. But in his silence, destiny was beginning to be written. That night, lying on his bed in a guest room of the palace, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 could not sleep. He looked at his ring and understood that that moment was the beginning of an irreversible change. He was no longer just a shepherd who had found a treasure underground, was the man summoned by the king, seen by all the nobles, suspected and perhaps even feared. The meeting with 𝕽𝖎𝖓 was not just an audience at court. It was an encounter with destiny itself. and 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 knew that, from that moment on, his life would never be the same. Chapter 12. Fatal Curiosity. For several days, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was still at the palace in Sardis, like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. He was treated with respect, but he always felt the eyes of the courtiers on him, prying, sometimes hostile. The people of the palace did not understand what a shepherd was doing within the royal walls. What merit could he have to stay close to the king? The question hung in the air like a shadow, and 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 began to feel the burden of isolation. Kandals, however, seemed increasingly drawn to his presence. He often called him to him, spoke to him about the gods, about destiny, about the signs of the times. Sometimes he asked him again about the tomb and the ring, as if he wanted to hear the story told differently each time. On other evenings, he shared more intimate thoughts with him, as with a friend. But one night, the king called him to a small room, away from the eyes of the court. The lamps burned weakly, and the air smelled of incense and wine. Kandal's gaze burned strangely, like that of a man possessed by an obsessive thought. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, he said, I would like to tell you a secret. Something that no one has ever seen before, except me. The shepherd felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know what to expect, but the king's tone did not allow for resistance. You see, Kandals continued, people say that I have been blessed with the most beautiful wife in all of Lydia. There is no other woman like her. Her beauty is so rare that the gods themselves could be jealous. And yet, he said, lifting his chin, no one takes my word for it. They murmur, they doubt, as if I were exaggerating. The king took a step towards 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 and looked him straight in the eye. But you will be a witness. You will see the truth with your own eyes. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 started. He understood her intention in an instant, and a shiver of horror ran through his body. Great king, I cannot, he whispered, in a barely audible voice. It is a profanation. The queen is your wife. She is sacred to the eyes of others. But Kandals laughed briefly, with a trace of contempt. It is not a profanation, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. It is proof. If I order you to look at her, it means that the gods themselves are witnesses to my oath. You are only confirming what I already know, that no other woman stands by his side. In 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's eyes, the king's words seemed madness. But at the same time, his tone left no room for refusal. He understood that resistance would not only be an insult, but also a danger. Tonight, Kandal said, you will stay hidden behind the door. When the queen enters our room and undresses, you will see with your own eyes. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt his heart freeze. He was caught in a terrible trap. If he accepted, he would commit sacrilege and tie his fate to a dirty secret. If he refused, he could attract the king's wrath and even death. When night fell over the palace, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was led through the dark corridors to the sovereign's private chambers. A heavy silence reigned everywhere. The king himself sat him down next to a large wooden door, slightly ajar, through which he could see part of the room. Wait, Kandals whispered to him, don't move or make a sound. Then he entered the room, leaving 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 alone, his heart beating like it was breaking his chest. Beyond the door, he could hear the king's footsteps, his quiet voice, then the sound of lighter, more graceful steps. Queen Pirosain had entered. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt his knees weaken. An unseen force pushed him to close his eyes, to run, but another force, the king's command, and perhaps his own curiosity, held him rooted to the spot. Through the crack in the door, he saw the queen's silhouette, tall, slender, with a face bathed in light. The woman seemed detached from a divine vision. Her hair fell in black waves over her shoulders, and every movement had the grace of a goddess. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt the blood rise to his cheeks. He was ashamed, but he could not take his eyes off her. The queen slowly let go of her robes, as if each layer were a revealed secret. He did not know whether to tremble, of guilt or amazement. For a moment, he forgot that he was a shepherd, forgot that he was in a king's palace, even forgot about the ring. All he saw was forbidden beauty, a beauty that even mortal eyes should not have contemplated. But that beauty was not only splendor, but also power. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 understood, perhaps without wanting to, that the woman he was looking at was not only the king's wife, but a queen endowed with a force of seduction and authority that could change destinies. And yet, in the midst of that scene, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 could not ignore something else, the feeling that the queen knew that her gaze, even if she could not see him, was passing through the door and burning him. As the queen headed for the bed, she stopped for a moment and turned suddenly, her eyes fixed on the crack in the door. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 drew a breath, feeling that he had been discovered. A second that seemed an eternity passed. The queen said nothing, but a cold, dangerous spark lit up in her gaze. Then she turned her back and continued as if nothing had happened. But 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 knew he had seen. Later, when it was all over and he was released from his hiding place, he met the king again. Kandals laughed delightedly, with a triumphant air. Well, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, have you seen it now with your own eyes? Wasn't I right? 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 did not answer immediately. He was afraid to say anything. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Yes, my lady. She is more beautiful than any woman I have ever seen." The king burst into a satisfied laugh and patted her on the shoulder in a friendly way, as if she had shared with him his greatest triumph. But 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 knew that something had broken that night. The king's curiosity, his madness in exposing his wife to a stranger, had given birth to a danger. Queen 𝕬𝖎𝑓𝑡𝑗 was no ordinary woman. She was a queen, and that look, cold and piercing, told him that she would never forget the affront. For the first time, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃 truly felt that the ring on his finger and everything it had brought into his life was not a gift, but a burden. He remembered the words of the elders. The gods take revenge not on those who err in ignorance, but on those who cross forbidden thresholds. And he, even pushed by the king's will, had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. That night was the beginning of the end. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃 fell asleep with difficulty, tormented by guilt and fear. In his dream, the queen's eyes followed him, burning and merciless. He knew that between him, the king and the queen, a web of destiny was now being woven, stronger than any human will, and deep down, he felt that soon, everything that had begun as a game of curiosity would turn into a tragedy of royal proportions. Chapter 13. The Queen's Beauty. That night did not fade easily for 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃. The shepherd, accustomed to the silence of the fields and the gentle rustling of the flocks, now felt a storm in his soul. He closed his eyes, and each time, the image of the queen appeared clearly to him, her graceful silhouette, her skin as white as marble illuminated by the flames of the lamps. That look that seemed to have pierced him even through the wall of concealment. It was not a simple memory. It was like a seal burned into his mind. Not even the ring, which had accustomed him to sensations of power and freedom, disturbed him so much any more. The queen's beauty had become a sweet but oppressive yoke. He tossed and turned in bed, trying to forget. I shouldn't have seen it. The gods are punishing me for my weakness. But at the same time, a voice's inner self told him that he had been forced, that it had not been his choice. And yet, guilt consumed him, because, deep down, he knew that he had not been just a victim. Part of him had wanted to watch, had wanted to stay there, spellbound by a forbidden beauty. Mornings in the palace had become different. Wherever he went, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃 felt that the walls held the echo of that night. When he passed through the courtyards, it seemed to him that every column accused him. When he met with the servants, it seemed to him that everyone knew, that everyone was silently judging him. But the real burden was when he saw the queen, the official meals. The queen sat next to King Candol's, wrapped in gold and rich robes, her diadem shining on her forehead. She did not speak much, but her every gesture, every lifting of an eyelid, seemed full of mystery. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃 did not dare to look at her. He could not look directly at her, but his eyes always betrayed the desire to do so, and whenever his courage overcame him and he looked up, he found the queen already looking at him. Not with gentleness, not with warmth, but with that piercing, cold gaze, through which she reminded him that she knew. She pierced his soul and left him naked, like a child caught in a shameful guilt. And such moments, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃 felt himself breaking in two. A part of him wanted to run away, to leave everything behind and return to his flocks, but another, stronger, was caught by the queen's spell, like a butterfly blinded by the flame of fire. As the days passed, the forbidden image did not fade, but deepened. He saw her again in his dreams, always differently. Sometimes the queen smiled at him and called him to her side. Sometimes she reprimanded him with a stormy voice. Sometimes she looked at him with longing, sometimes with contempt, and each dream left him more disturbed. In the morning he woke up sweating, feeling shame and desire mixed together. What kind of curse is this? He wondered. It's not my fault, and yet I feel that I have sinned. The golden ring, which he had once regarded as a miracle, now seemed to him an instrument of temptation. He sometimes told himself that if he used the power of invisibility, he could follow the queen, could see her as many times as he wanted. But this thought terrified him. Realized that he was approaching the edge of the abyss. One afternoon, in the palace gardens, fate played a new trick on him. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃 was walking alone, seeking peace among the trees and fountains, when suddenly he saw the queen coming from the marble pavilion. She was accompanied by several maids, but her gentle steps, her serene gaze, made the whole place light up. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃 lowered his eyes and retreated to one side, but just then the queen stopped. He said something to the maids, and they moved away, leaving her alone. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃 felt his blood run cold. Queen 𝕬𝖎𝑟𝑒 stepped towards him, slowly, but with the certainty of a feline who knows that its prey cannot escape. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃, she said in a low but clear voice. His name on the queen's lips was like a song and a threat at the same time. Knelt immediately, trying to hide his agitation. Your Highness. She looked at him for a long time, then smiled slightly, a smile he could not decipher. You are agitated, shepherd. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝑃 felt it pierce him. He wanted to deny it, but the words stopped in his throat. "Don't be afraid," she added, almost whispering. "I know what you saw, I know what the king did. You are not the one to blame." But as she said this, her gaze said something else, a silent judgment, but also a promise. Then she turned and left, leaving him trembling. From that day on, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt that the queen had entered even deeper into his thoughts. It was not only her beauty that haunted him, but also the words she had spoken. "You are not the one to blame." But did she really believe that? Or was she preparing a trap for him? But his soul, instead of calming down, heated up even more. He began to imagine what it would have been like to be near her, to hear her voice close, to touch her hands. The imagination burned his mind, and reality became unbearable. He could no longer be just a shepherd. He could no longer be just a guest of the king. He was caught in a whirlpool that he could no longer stop. Night after night, the queen appeared in his dream. Sometimes she scolded him, sometimes she called him. Sometimes her face was confused with that of the goddess Aphrodite, sometimes with that of Nemesis, the goddess of revenge. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 woke up torn between desire and fear. He tried to pray, but the gods seemed to have abandoned him. He tried to convince himself that it was only a passing shadow, but everything deepened even more. He was like a man who, after drinking from a poisoned spring, feels that he can no longer live without that water, even if he knows that he will kill him. Finally, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 understood that he was no longer the same. From the simple and curious young shepherd, he had become a troubled man, caught between desires and fears. The queen's beauty was not just an image in his mind, but a force that shaped him, pulling him towards an unknown path. He felt that his future was no longer in the fields, nor in the flocks of sheep, nor in the wooden huts. His future was linked to the palace, to the queen, to the king who, without knowing it, had thrown his soul into the flames of passion. And somewhere, deep in his heart, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 understood a terrible truth. No man who has seen forbidden beauty can ever be free. Chapter 14. The Queen's Shame and Fury. In Lydia's marble palace, the quiet of the nights was no longer the same for the queen. Although she shone at banquets, although she walked through the gardens with measured steps and calculated smiles, deep in her heart burned a wound that no one could see. The woman who had been the pride of the kingdom, whose beauty was sung by poets and envied by other ladies, now felt that she had been mocked in her most intimate secret. She had not been asked, had not been listened to, had not been asked for permission. King 𝕽𝖎𝖓, blinded by the desire to boast of her beauty, had violated her honor by calling a stranger to look at what should have remained only her husband's, and what was more, that stranger was not a nobleman. He was not a warrior, but a simple shepherd, recently brought to court. For Queen, this act was not just a personal offense. It was a betrayal of her own dignity as a queen, a gesture that brought her down from her throne and made her an object of spectacle. And the first days after the incident, the queen remained silent. She did not let any emotion betray her soul. She looked at 𝕽𝖎𝖓 with the same calm expression, she answered his words with the same apparent gentleness, but inside her a storm was growing. When she remembered the gaze of 𝕽𝖎𝖓, hidden in the darkness, she felt a burning shame. But that shame was mixed with a cold, sharp anger. He should not have been there, he should not have seen me. And yet, he saw me. And now, how will he look at me? As a queen, or as prey? With each passing day, these thoughts became more oppressive. The queen knew that she had to choose, either remain a prisoner of shame, or turn it into a sword. In that evening, in her room adorned with fine fabrics, she looked at her face in the bronze mirror. She was as beautiful as ever, full lips, hair as black as night, green eyes that seemed to hide seas of mystery. And yet, in the mirror she saw not only beauty. She saw a wound, a humiliation. "I will not be anyone's plaything," she said to herself in a low voice, almost like a prayer. "Neither of the king nor of the shepherd." Then she swore to herself that she would demand an account. The decisive moment came on another night, when the queen felt that 𝕽𝖎𝖓's gaze rested on her again, even for a moment, at a feast. It was the gaze of a tormented man, but also of one who could not forget. That moment made her understand that her shame was not only between her and the king, but between her and that stranger. The secret was no longer a secret. She felt that her body and honor had been put at the mercy of another. And then, her anger intensified. That night she did not sleep. She walked far and wide, her steps echoing on the cold tiles. She remembered the goddesses of vengeance, Nemesis and the 𝕽𝖓𝖛, and summoned in her thoughts the power, "Give me strength to wash away this shame in blood or power. I cannot live otherwise." The next day, the queen decided not to delay any longer. She secretly called a faithful servant and ordered her to bring 𝕽𝖎𝖓 to her. Not in front of everyone, but secretly, in a secluded room of the palace. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 came troubled, feeling that he could not refuse the queen's call. When he entered, he found her standing straight, her face illuminated by oil lamps, beautiful as a statue of a goddess. "𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉," she said coldly, "you know why I called you." The young shepherd bowed his head, trembling. "Your Majesty, I did not want to. It was the king's wish." The queen interrupted him with a gesture. "I know. But that does not change the fact that you saw what you were not supposed to see." He dared to raise his eyes to her. "Please forgive me, Queen, I did not ask to be a witness, and yet I was." She fixed him with a look that combined shame and anger. "My forgiveness cannot erase the shame. What happened is unforgivable. Why king betrayed me. And you, even without your will, are part of this betrayal." The words fell like arrows. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 felt his soul torn. "Then what do you want from me?" he asked, his voice low. The queen took a step closer. "I want justice, and justice is not obtained with prayers, but with deeds." Her eyes shone like two green flames. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 felt that at that moment she was not just a woman, but the very embodiment of Nemesis. From that evening, the queen's decision was unshakable. She could not live on as if nothing had happened. She had sworn revenge to herself, and a queen's oath was not a simple promise, but a covenant with the gods. She thought long and hard about how she could punish the betrayal. She hated 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 for his recklessness, but she also hated the fact that 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 had become a witness. To regain her dignity, she had to transform shame into power. She knew that she could not publicly reveal the incident. Such a confession would bring mockery and scandal upon her. In the eyes of the world, the queen had to remain unblemished. But in secret, revenge had to be fulfilled, and the following days, Queen Pírisane hid her thoughts under a veil of silence. She let 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 believe that everything was as it had been before. She smiled at him at the tables, spoke to him gently, offered him gestures of a faithful wife. But behind every smile, a murderous thought hid, and at the same time, she studied 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃. She watched him from afar, trying to decipher his soul. She felt his anxiety, she saw his agitation. This gave her strength. She realized that he too was caught in the net of that night, that he too was suffering. But this did not bring her comfort, but only more determination. "If he suffers, then he will understand why my punishment is just," she told herself. One night, in the secret of her room, the queen raised her hands to the sky and uttered an oath. "Gods, be witnesses. I swear that I will not leave treason unpunished. I swear that blood or power will wash away my shame, and no sleep will be peaceful until I am freed." And in that moment, she felt that Aphrodite herself turned against love, or Nemesis herself, was giving her strength. Thus began the queen's path to revenge. Her path was not that of a victim, but of a master of destiny. In the eyes of the world, she remained the same submissive wife, but deep down in her heart she was already the judge and executioner of those who had betrayed her. And anyone who had looked at her in those days could have sworn that in her beauty now lurked a shadow of cruelty, as if the divine face of a goddess hid the fangs of a snake beneath it. Chapter 15. The Confessed Secret. In the dead of night, when the palace was silent and only torches burned softly in the corridors, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 felt that the burden of his secret was becoming unbearable. For weeks he had worn the golden ring on his finger, that shining circle found in the giant's tomb. At first it had been just a beautiful jewel, but after he discovered its terrifying power, his whole life had been shaken. He was constantly torn between amazement and terror. How could a simple object give him access to a power reserved for the gods? How could he, a humble shepherd, become invisible any time and anywhere? If the ring was a divine gift, why had it come to him? And if it was a curse, why hadn't she left it where she had found it? That evening, when the queen called him back to her room, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 felt that he could no longer hide the truth. Her presence weighed on his soul, her beauty troubled him, but above all, her piercing gaze seemed to pierce all his secrets. The queen greeted him sitting on a high chair, her back straight, wearing a purple cloak. The lamps scattered playful shadows on the walls, but around her it seemed that a special light reigned. "You have come, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃," she said calmly, but in a tone that did not admit of refusal. "How could I not come, your Majesty?" He answered in a trembling voice. He looked at her with restraint, fearing and wanting to get closer at the same time. "I told you then," the queen continued, "that an indelible secret was bound between us. But I feel that she is not the only one. You carry with you a shadow, an anxiety that betrays you. Tell me, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃, what are you hiding?" 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 felt his heart tighten. His whole being demanded to be silent, not to share with anyone the secret discovered in the depths. But the queen's voice was stronger than his will. "Your Majesty, there is something, indeed. Something that I cannot carry forward alone. If I tell, you may think I am crazy." The queen crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "Mad or not, you are bound to my fate. And I have the right to know everything you hide. Speak." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 took a deep breath. He slowly removed the ring from his finger and held it in his palm. Its gold shimmered warmly, but in that light there was also a cold, almost inhuman glow. "This is the ring," he said in a low voice, as if he feared the walls would betray him. "I found it deep down, in a tomb of an ancient giant. I thought it was just an ornament, but it is not. It has a power that I cannot even fully understand." The queen looked at him carefully, her curiosity stronger than any other emotion. "A power? What kind of power?" 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 bit his lips, then decided he couldn't hide it anymore. He put the ring back on his finger, discreetly turned its stone inward, and right in front of the queen, he disappeared. Shiver ran through the queen's body. Before her eyes, the young shepherd had melted like a shadow under the light of the lamps. The place where he had been was now empty, as if he had never existed. Only his voice, floating in the air, broke her silence. "See, your majesty, I'm not here anymore. And yet, I am." Queen 𝕬𝖎𝖓𝖌 brought her hand to her lips, caught between amazement and fear. "Gods," she whispered. "How is that possible?" Suddenly, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 appeared before her again, as if plucked from the shadows. His eyes burned with a new intensity. "I don't know how, Queen, I don't know why, but this ring makes me invisible. Whenever I want, I can disappear from the eyes of the world." A heavy silence fell between them. The queen stared at him, trying to understand whether he had dreamed or not. She wanted to touch him, to make sure that he was real. Finally, she found her voice. "Do you understand what this means, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉? No mortal should possess such power. It is not a simple gift. It is a curse and a temptation." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 bowed his head. "I know. Since I discovered it, I have no peace. I fear that the gods have chosen me to lose me. But what can I do? I couldn't throw it away. I couldn't leave it. It was as if he tied me to it." The queen rested her chin on her palm, meditating. "Now I understand why your eyes always hid a secret, but also why our fates are linked. If you have this power, it is no longer just yours. It is mine too." 𝕽𝖎𝖉 looked at her troubled. "What do you mean?" She stood up slowly, approaching him. "You said that the king brought you here against your will, and I am the victim of his madness. But with this power, we can overturn everything." 𝕽𝖎𝖉 remained silent. Until then, he had been afraid to use the ring except for play and curiosity. He had never thought of it as a weapon of destiny. And yet, the queen's words sounded like a truth that he could not ignore. "Your Majesty, the ring makes me invisible, but it does not give me courage. How can I use it without falling into sin?" The queen fixed him with her green eyes, shining like two flames. "It is not sin that lies in wait for you, 𝕽𝖎𝖉, but weakness. If you fear, then you are the slave of this power. If you master it, you will be the master of destiny." He shook his head. "But what if the gods are angry? What if I was chosen only to be tempted and overthrown?" "Or perhaps," the queen replied, "you were chosen to fulfill a greater will. Perhaps this ring was meant to reach you because you are a simple man, not yet tainted by the greed of the nobles. I believe that it was not by chance that you stepped into the depths, and it was not by chance that you arrived in this palace." 𝕽𝖎𝖉 fell silent. He felt that the queen's words were like a siren's song, dangerous, but impossible to ignore. Then the queen placed her hand on his shoulder. The gesture was gentle, but it concealed an iron determination. "You have confessed your secret. Now it is no longer just yours. It is mine too. I swear that no one else will find out. But in return, I ask you not to forget that I was the first witness to your power." 𝕽𝖎𝖉 closed his eyes, feeling the bond between them strengthen. The ring no longer separated him only from people, but tied him even more tightly to the queen. "So be it, your majesty," he said in a hushed voice. "I have told you what I have not dared to tell anyone. From now on, my fate and the rings are linked to yours." The queen smiled, but it was not a smile of joy, but one of the power that is being born. "Then, 𝕽𝖎𝖉, let us prepare. One day, this secret will change our lives, both mine and yours." Thus, that night, the secret of the ring no longer belonged to 𝕽𝖎𝖉 alone. It had become part of a silent plot, a bridge between the lost shepherd and the queen thirsting for justice. For him, the confession had been a relief, but also a condemnation. For her, it had been the beginning of a plan that was taking shape more and more clearly. And for both of them, it had been the moment when their destinies were irrevocably linked, like two threads burning together in the same flame. Chapter 16. The Hidden Plan. Night had fallen over Sardis with oppressive silence. The palace, tall and imposing, rose like a stone colossus shining under the pale moonlight. The corridors were empty, and only a few sleepy soldiers watched at the royal gates. And her room, the queen did not sleep. Her gaze was lost in the dance of the flames on the hearth, but her mind worked ceaselessly, weaving hidden plans like a spider's web. Since 𝕽𝖎𝖉's revelation of the ring, everything had changed. The power she had seen with her own eyes. No 𝕷𝖚 that clumsy and indecisive young shepherd, the queen had discovered an instrument of fate, perhaps even an ally destined to bring her liberation. But for this to be accomplished, she had to convince him, to shape his will, to make him willingly walk on the path that she could see clearly. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 entered the room with uncertain steps. His tired eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and his hand instinctively sought his ring. Since he had confessed his secret, his soul had not found rest. "You called me, your majesty?" he asked, trying to hide his anxiety. The queen rose slowly, like a feline preparing to attack its prey. She looked at him for a long time, with a barely outlined smile. "I called you because I dreamed, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, I dreamed of a future in which I am no longer the prisoner of a mad king, in which you are no longer the lost shepherd, but the leader beside me." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 started, not knowing whether to laugh or be afraid. Leader? I am just a simple man, your majesty. This ring does not make me more than I am." "You are mistaken," she replied. "The ring gives you something that no noble, no soldier, not even the king has, invisibility. With it, nothing stands in your way." He looked down. "And what am I to do with this power? Play with the shadow for the rest of my life?" The queen took a step towards him, her voice hardening. "No, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. Use it to break the chains that hold us both prisoners." That moment, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt a shiver. He understood where she was going. "You mean that I should rise up against the king?" The queen moved even closer, until he felt her warm breath on his cheek. "Not only against him, but in his place. Think, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, Candle's brought you into his sick games, forced you to look at my body, defiled your innocence, is the cause of my shame and your struggle. The gods gave you this power not to hide, but to right an injustice." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 took a step back, as if her words had burned him. "Your Majesty, you speak of murder, of regicide. This is not just a crime, it is blasphemy. How can I raise my hand against the anointed of the gods?" The queen folded her arms and let her voice flow like poisoned honey. "The anointed of the gods. Do not deceive yourself, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. Candle's is nothing but a man blinded by pride, a man who treats his wife as a plaything and his subjects as slaves. You think the gods still support such a tyrant? No, they chose you. You entered the earth and received the ring. You are the sign of change." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was caught between two huge forces, the fear of the gods and the irresistible attraction of the queen. She continued to surround him with her words. "Think, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. With the ring you could enter his room without anyone seeing you point one blow, and it would all be over. There would be no need for an army, no wars, no blood in the streets. It would be a clean, swift change, decided by fate." He shook his head, his heart beating wildly. "But I am not a murderer. I grew up among sheep. I learned to play the whistle, not to shed blood." The queen fixed him with her burning green eyes. "And yet, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, you have already seen what you should not have seen. You have penetrated a secret that did not belong to you. You think you can ever be just the shepherd you once were? No, your fate is sealed. Either you are the king's instrument and die in shame, or you become the hand of the gods and live as a king." The silence lengthened. A fierce struggle was brewing in 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's soul. He saw his mother's serene face, the green hills where he had grown up, the nights when he watched over his flock under the starry sky. All of this told him to run, to leave everything behind. But the queen's eyes, full of irresistible force, whispered something else, that he could be more, that he could break the chains of humiliation and take destiny into his own hands. The queen touched his hand lightly, and he flinched as if burned. "Don't be in a hurry to answer, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. But remember one thing. If you do nothing, one day Candle's will ask more of you. He will set another trap for you, and then you will perish. But I do not ask you to die for me, but to live with me, and to reign together." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt these words dig deep into his heart. He was tempted and terrified at the same time. He realized that once he set foot on this path, there would be no turning back. After a long moment, he whispered, "If the gods chose me for this, why do I feel like I am lost?" The queen looked at him with gentleness, but also with steely determination. "You are not lost, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. You are transformed, and every transformation brings with it fear. But after fear comes power." He clenched his fist on the ring, as if trying to feel if the object was sending him the god's answer. Around him, the air seemed heavier, denser. "I do not ask you to do this now," the queen added. "But know that the day will come soon, and then we will have no time for hesitation." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 left the room with the heavy steps of a man who carries the entire world on his shoulders and his mind. The queen's voice echoed, "Either you are the king's instrument and die, or you become the hand of the gods and reign." That night, Sard slept peacefully, but in the palace, within its cold walls, a conspiracy was being born. The plan was still just a whisper, an idea planted in the mind of a shepherd. But the seed had been planted, and the queen knew it would sprout. For her, the plan was not just a temptation, but the only way. For him, it was the beginning of the abyss. But fate was pushing both of them towards its edge, slowly, inevitably. Chapter 17. The Night of the Plot. Night had descended upon Sardis, covering the city with an eerie silence. The usually bustling streets were deserted, and the torches on the palace walls burned dimly, like tired eyes, and in the distance, only the murmur of the Pactolus River could be heard, carrying threads of gold in its waters, as if the earth itself guarded the riches of Lydia. That night, however, it was not gold that flowed through the world, but fear and desire and the heart of the palace. The plot was beginning to come to life. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 stood in the darkness, in his modest chambers on the edge of the city, holding the shining ring in his palm. The fire in the hearth had gone out, and the room seemed cold and deserted. He remembered the queen's words. "You are the hand of the gods. If you do not stop the king, he will destroy you." That sentence, it echoed to him like a relentless echo. He ran his finger over the ring and felt its subtle vibration. Each time he turned it, the world seemed to change. He looked into a bronze mirror. His face disappeared, leaving only the empty reflection of the room, invisible. No one could know he was there. This power was dizzying, but also frightening. That night, he had to decide whether he would remain the simple shepherd of old, or whether he would become a man driven by destiny to greatness and terror. His footsteps echoed silently through the deserted streets. The city slept, but his heart beat wildly. He felt every wall, every tower of the palace watching and judging him. When he reached the huge bronze gates, the soldiers stood guard, their spears shining in the torchlight. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 turned the ring on his finger, and his body melted into invisibility. He slipped among them without being felt. The heavy breathing of the soldiers, the rustling of their armor, and the smell of burning oil from the torches seemed to surround him, but no one knew that. A living shadow was passing among them, felt for the first time the absolute thrill of power. It was a god who passed unseen among mortals. The corridors of the palace unfolded like an endless labyrinth. He had passed there many times as a simple servant, but now everything seemed different. The statues of the gods looked at him accusingly, and the colorful mosaics on the floor seemed to tell stories about kings of old. He realized that history was in his hands, that in a single moment he could change the future of an entire kingdom. His heart raced. Every time a servant passed by him, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 held his breath, although he knew that no one could see him. Still, the fear was there, deeply rooted. What if the ring had lost its power right then? What if the gods, playful and cruel, had decided to leave it uncovered in the middle of the palace? As he approached the royal chambers, the atmosphere grew heavier. The walls were covered with rich tapestries, the torches burned brighter, and the scent of rare perfumes filled the air. Deep in the palace was King Candol's chamber, guarded by 2 imposing guards. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 watched them carefully. Their eyes were vigilant, spears held tightly in their hands. He slipped between them like a breeze. No sound, no footsteps, only his rapid breathing. Once past, he realized how easy it had been. His heart told him that nothing could stop him. Inside, the king's chamber was bathed in the pale light of a candle. Heavy purple curtains fell to the floor, hiding the world outside. In a huge bed, carved from cedar and inlaid with ivory, Candol slept soundly. His breathing was heavy and quiet filled the room. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 stood still, listening. He felt his palms sweaty and his knees weak. In his right hand, he clutched the dagger that the queen had given him earlier. "One blow," she had told him, "and everything will change." He approached slowly, stepping silently. The light played on the king's face, revealing the features of a handsome, yet proud and arrogant man. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 remembered the moments of humiliation when he had been forced to see his wife naked. Anger and shame mixed in his soul, but alongside them stood an immense fear. He raised the dagger, and the tip shone faintly. That moment, however, an inner voice pierced his thoughts. "Are you the judge of life and death? Who are you, shepherd, to decide the fate of a king?" His hand trembled. Tears welled up in his eyes. He wanted to run, to leave everything behind, but also to stay, to take his rightful power. He was caught between 2 worlds, the world of his former innocence and the world of temptation that had opened up to him through the ring. The queen had told him that the gods had chosen him. But what if it was all a lie? What if everything was just a trap of fate, destined to lose him? Candol stirred in his sleep, muttering something unintelligible. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. He was on the verge of becoming a murderer. But he knew that once he fled, the queen would not forgive him, and the king would discover him. He was trapped like an animal in a corner. He remembered the queen's words again. "If you do nothing, you will perish. If you kill him, you will reign." He raised his dagger again, but this time his gaze was more determined. The ring on his finger shone faintly, like a seal of fate, but he did not strike. Not yet. He retreated to the curtains and stood there, breathing hard. He felt that he was not ready, that he should wait for the right moment. Maybe the queen was right, maybe fate was pushing him towards murder, but his heart still struggled, refusing to accept it easily. The night passed, and silence reigned in the palace. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 remained there, invisible, watching the king sleep carefree, unaware of the danger lurking a few steps away. When dawn began to break, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 left the room, slipping back through the silent corridors. The ring still protected him, but his soul was torn. He had not become a murderer, but he was no longer the pure shepherd he once was. He was in the middle, caught between two worlds, between two destinies. That night, no blood had been shed, but the plot had taken root. The palace had witnessed the invisible shadow that had crept through the walls, the man who was one breath away from changing history. The queen was waiting for him. She knew that his indecision was only a stage, that once he entered the king's room, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 could not turn back. Time was working for her, for 𝕽𝖎𝖓. However, time it flowed like a sword of fire, approaching the inevitable moment. Chapter 18. The Assassin in the Shadow. The night chosen by the gods to seal Lydia's fate was heavy, oppressive, like a black sheet stretched over the city. Sardis slept, but in the heart of the palace, an unseen shudder simmered. Candles burned weakly in the royal corridors, and shadows swayed on the walls like spirits eager to witness an act of blood. That night, the shepherd became a murderer, and the common man was destined to rise to the throne. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 walked again within the palace walls, the ring twisted on his finger. This time, however, he was no longer gripped by doubt. A dark flame burned in his eyes, fueled by anger, humiliation, and the desire to forge a new path. The queen had pushed him on this path, but the true choice now belonged entirely to him, and his hand in his right hand, he clutched the dagger she offered, a thin, silver blade with an ivory handle, sharp enough to slice flesh like paper. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt the weapon pulse almost alive in his palm, as if it were thirsty for blood. Silence reigned in the halls of the palace. Only 𝕽𝖎𝖓's unseen footsteps creaked soundlessly, and the armor of the guards creaked here and there, in a monotonous rhythm. He passed by them like a shadow, and no mortal could see him, no mortal could stop him. Arriving in front of the royal chamber, his heart was beating wildly. The door was guarded by guards, just like the night before, but his invisibility made his presence untouchable. He could touch their shoulders, he could whisper in their ears, and they would remain unaware. This power, it made him feel a mixture of pride and fear. He slowly pushed the heavy door open. The hinges creaked faintly, but no one suspected what danger was lurking inside. The king's chamber was immersed in silence. The heavy purple curtains barely moved, swayed by a weak current of air on the carved bed. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 was sleeping soundly, his body half covered by a golden mantle. Next to him, on a table, shone the royal crown, like a miniature sun, the symbol of supreme power. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 approached slowly, each step a struggle between hesitation and determination. He remembered the queen's face, with her burning eyes and her voice like a sentence. Either him or you. Either his death or your destruction. He bent over the king. The light of the candle outlined his proud, calm features, of the one who had ruled an empire. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt for a moment a heart-wrenching. Hatred and humiliation clashed with a shadow of respect. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 was not just a man, but his king, the anointed of the gods. But even the gods, through the strange events that had brought him here, seemed to demand this sacrifice. The raised dagger trembled in his hand. He knew that a single blow would change everything. He knew that the blood that was about to flow could never be washed away, that he, the shepherd of old, would never be the same. In a moment of deep silence, time seemed to stop. The whole world waited. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 brought the dagger down with force. The blade penetrated the king's chest, cutting the silence of the night with a chilling sound. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 woke up suddenly, his eyes wide open in pain and amazement. A heartbreaking groan escaped his lips. He raised his hand to the wound, but warm blood flowed in streams, staining the golden cloak and the white sheets. His gaze rose into the darkness, searching for the culprit, but he found only emptiness. "Who?" he managed to whisper, before blood filled his mouth. 𝕽𝖎𝖓, invisible, was close to him. The king's gaze, confused and full of horror, seemed to search for an unseen face. Then, the life faded from his eyes, and his body fell inertly on the bed, like a flesh doll. The silence that followed was oppressive. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 withdrew his blade, red with blood, and looked at the face of the one he had killed. There was no satisfaction in that sight, only an immense emptiness. He had expected to feel power, liberation, triumph. But what he felt was fear and nausea. His hands were shaking. He could smell the iron scent of blood mixed with the perfumes of the room, and in his mind, a terrible question arose. What have I done? I have killed a king. I have killed the man I was supposed to serve. But at the same time, another voice whispered to him, You have broken the chains. You are free. The power is yours now. He moved away from the bed, trying to catch his breath. The room seemed to close in on him. The heavy curtains, the pale candles, the shining crown, all looked at him like silent witnesses to the crime. That moment, the door opened slowly. Queen Pirisane stepped inside, her face covered in dark veils. Her eyes, however, burned with intensity. Her gaze stopped on the inert body of the king, then she lifted her head to where she knew 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was, invisible. She said nothing for a few moments. She just raised her hand. And in that gesture one could read the certainty of victory. "You are free now," she whispered, in a voice that mixed triumph and gentleness. "And you are mine." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 twisted his ring, emerging from the darkness. His face was pale, drawn, like that of a man who had looked into the eyes of death. The queen looked at him without fear, even with cold admiration. She approached him, took his bloody hand and squeezed it between her thin fingers. "Do not be afraid. The gods wanted this. Now you will be king." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 did not answer. His eyes were lost, fixed on the king's body, and his mind. The images of the crime were repeated obsessively. Candle's stunned gaze, the blood flowing, the whisper, "Who?" It was an echo that he would never be able to forget. But it was too late for regrets. The road was open, and turning back was impossible. The queen led him to the crown. With a solemn gesture, she lifted it and placed it in his hands. The heavy metal pressed down on his arms, but also on his soul. "Wear it," she told him. "This is your reward and your curse." 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt the symbolic weight of that moment. From wandering shepherd, he had become a murderer and a king. From a simple man, he had become the shadow killer and future ruler of Lydia. That night, the palace remained silent, not knowing what had happened behind the purple curtains. But the ancient walls, the statues of the gods and the waters of the Pactolus River kept the secret. Candle's, the king who had lived with arrogance and madness, lay breathless, and 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, the shepherd who had discovered an enchanted ring, had taken the first step on the path of blood and power. The fate of Lydia had been rewritten that night. A new king had risen, but the price was written in blood on the walls of history. Chapter 19. The Unexpected Coronation. The morning that followed the night of the murder brought with it a deceptive silence over Sardis. The sun rose reddish, like a wound in the sky, and its light reflected on the walls of the royal palace. The city, untouched by the bloody winds of the palace, continued its existence. Merchants were preparing to open their stalls, children ran through the streets, and craftsmen lit fires in their workshops, and no one knew that King Candle's was no longer alive, that Lydia was already under a new rule behind. The heavy curtains in the royal chamber, the blood had cooled on the sheets, and the body of the murdered man had been hidden from the eyes of the world. The queen had stayed awake all night, next to 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, planning their future. The two knew that dawn brought not only a new day, but also a new destiny for the kingdom, and the early hours of the morning, the news of the king's death had to be announced to those close to the throne. The queen sent for her trusted advisers, the people who had watched over Lydia's political stability for years. When they stepped into the throne room, where light filtered through blood-colored stained glass windows, they found the queen standing tall, her gaze iron, and next to her, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, the shepherd turned nobleman overnight. Rumors of his closeness to the king had already circulated, but no one suspected what role he would play in this story. The advisers bowed their heads, waiting for an explanation. "Your king was killed by the machinations of the gods," said the queen in a clear and cold voice. "His dreams and mistakes have drawn divine wrath upon him. But the kingdom cannot remain without a ruler. Here is 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, the one chosen by the gods to wear the crown and save Lydia from chaos." Her words fell like lightning into the souls of the counselors. It was unexpected news, a theatrical coup that none could have imagined. Shepherd, a man without noble blood, raised to the throne of Lydia? Murmurs of astonishment filled the hall, but the queen's gaze, sharp as a sword, silenced them. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 stood erect, his hands clasped to his chest. He said nothing. He still felt the burden of the crime on his shoulders, and his conscience was caught between guilt and destiny. To secure his reign, the queen knew that it was not enough to proclaim the change. The people had to be convinced, the gods had to be won over, and the nobility had to be defeated by cunning or force. That same day, the courtiers were summoned to attend a gathering in the great hall of the palace. The curtains had been drawn, and the king's throne had been shrouded in an aura of solemnity. The priests of the temples had been brought in to confirm the legitimacy of the new power. The queen stood before everyone and spoke well-crafted words. Candle's was loved by the gods, but also punished for his pride. Lydia did not may be left without a ruler, and my dream, Artemis, the protector goddess of the kingdom, appeared to me, telling me that 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, this brave young man, is the chosen one. He bears the sign of divine power and will lead our people to a new era of glory. The crowd murmured. The priests, bought or afraid, confirmed in chorus. The nobility, although uneasy, understood that resistance could be fatal. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, as he listened to these words, felt a chasm rise between what he had been and what he was becoming. He, the simple shepherd, was presented as the chosen one of the gods. The lie was transformed into truth by the force of words and by the royal aura that the queen spread around him. That afternoon, the main temple of Sardis was adorned for a ritual of unparalleled solemnity. The bronze bells rang, calling the people to witness a coronation that would remain in history. The priests they were, dressed in white robes, and the altar was covered with flowers and gold. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, still wearing his simple clothes, had been hastily dressed in a purple tunic and leather sandals adorned with silver threads. It was strange for him to feel these heavy, foreign clothes on his body. The procession began with the invocation of the gods. Sacrifices of bulls and sheep were brought, and the thick smoke of the sacrifices rose to the sky. The people watched, some with curiosity, others with fear, others with disbelief. Who was this man who, overnight, became king? But no one dared to murmur more than a thought. When the moment had come, the queen raised the golden crown, the same one that 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 had worn. With slow, solemn gestures, she placed it on 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's forehead. That moment, the bells rang again, and the priests shouted, "Glory to the new king of Lydia, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, chosen by the gods." The crowd erupted in a mixture of acclamations and whispers. Astonishment was visible in the eyes of the people. Some bowed respectfully, others watched with suspicion. But in that moment, the decision had been sealed. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt the weight of the crown pressing on his temples, as if an invisible hand had squeezed his skull. The cold metal was not only a symbol of power, but also of burden. Deep down, he felt torn between two worlds, that of the shepherd who loved the freedom of the plains, and that of the king prisoner on a throne of gold and blood. He remembered 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's face, his look in his last moments. That "who?" echoed in his mind. He felt that, no matter how hard he tried to convince himself, the gods had not chosen him. He had chosen him through murder. However, the people did not know the truth, and the truth now seemed like a story that only he and the queen kept secret. The queen approached him and whispered, "Now you are what you were meant to become. Accept your destiny and do not look back." Her words had the weight of a curse. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 understood that turning back was no longer possible. After the coronation, rumors spread quickly in Sardis. People gathered in the squares, arguing among themselves. Some said that the queen had lost her mind and brought a simple shepherd to the throne. Others whispered that the gods had actually sent 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 to fix 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's madness. And others, more practical, knew that any resistance could bring death, so they bowed to the new king and the palace. The nobility was discontented. Many felt that the royal blood had been mocked. But the queen, with her cunning, controlled them. Anyone who murmured too loudly was threatened or silenced. The power of the ring, the secret of invisibility, gave 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 an advantage that no one suspected. Thus, slowly, skepticism turned into acceptance, and history, truth does not always have the last word. Power shapes it to its will. That evening, when the palace was lit by torches and musicians sang in honor of the new king, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 withdrew for a moment to the high terrace of the palace. He looked out over Sardis. The city bathed in moonlight. A question burned in his heart. Can I, a shepherd, be king? Or will I always remain the shadowy murderer, prisoner of the ring? The queen came to him, leaning on the railing. Her gaze was calm, sure. You are no longer a shepherd, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. You are the king of Lydia. This city, this people, this future belong to you. He fell silent, knew that behind those words was hidden not only the queen's ambition, but also the burden of an irrevocable choice. From below, in the streets, the murmur of the crowd rose, a mixture of fear, hope, and submission. Sards already recognized him as its new master, and so, that night, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 became not just a man with a secret, but the king of an entire kingdom, crowned by the gods. In the eyes of the people, but in reality anointed with the blood of 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. Chapter 20. Seduced by Power. In the first weeks after his coronation, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 began to discover what power truly meant. If before he had been a simple shepherd, thrown by fate into the whirlpool of royal intrigues, now he was the most powerful man in Lydia. The throne, the crown, and the army belonged to him. But, beyond all this, he had something that no other king in history had ever had, the ring of invisibility. This jewel was no longer just a magical object, but a key to any gate, a weapon more powerful than thousands of soldiers. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt that through it the gods had given him not only the kingdom, but also the absolute freedom to do whatever he wanted, without fear of consequences. First, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 used the ring cautiously. Tonight, when the palace was quiet, he would turn it gently on his finger and disappear from before the mirror. He felt how the air he was enveloped, his body becoming a shadow. The world around him seemed to belong to him. He walked through the halls of the invisible palace, listening to the conspiratorial discussions of the nobles, hearing the rumors of the courtiers, gathering secrets from the whispers of the servants. The power to know everything without being seen gave him a dizzying feeling, a knowledge that made him feel almost like a god. But soon, human desires, stronger than wisdom, pushed him to go further. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 began to use his invisibility for forbidden pleasures. One night, attracted by the laughter of the young slaves who were bathing in the palace baths, he put on his ring and walked unseen among them. He watched how their bodies shone in the water, how they laughed and joked without knowing that they were being watched. He felt guilty, but the guilt was overshadowed by the fascination of total freedom. No one could see, no one could punish him. He was the master of their world, even if they had no idea. Such escapades became more and more frequent. Each time, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 told himself it was the last, but the ring called him again and again, like a demon that always whispers, "Dare! The unseen gold!" It was not only carnal pleasures that tempted him. Greed began to take hold. One day, invisibly, he entered the treasury of the kingdom. It had been brought before him in plain sight, as a king, but now he looked at him differently, as a thief untouched by the law. Gold, jewels, expensive weapons, holy relics, all were at his feet. He ran his hand over the piles of coins, feeling the coldness of the metal, and laughed to himself. Everything is mine, and no one can hold me accountable. Although he had no need to steal, the sensation of being able to take anything at any time was intoxicating. Tea was not about wealth, but about the absolute power to possess. Invisibility gave him access to the intimate secrets of the court. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 witnessed the confessions of nobles, the secret discussions between generals, the forbidden loves in the alcoves of the palace. Once, he entered the room of a renowned noblewoman for her beauty. He watched her sleep, her breathing smooth and her hair spread out on the pillows. He reached out to touch her cheek, but stopped. He didn't want to arouse suspicion, but the temptation was huge. Left, but the desire never left him. He began to imagine that he could conquer any woman without her ever knowing, to be present in every person's life without being discovered. In a short time, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉's escapades had become a secret routine. During the day he appeared as a wise and just king, but at night he disappeared into the shadow of invisibility, seeking pleasures and secrets. It was as if he had lived two lives, a public, grand one, and a hidden, debauched one. The queen, who had been his accomplice at first, began to feel the change. She noticed his absent gazes, his enigmatic smiles, his hidden fatigue. She suspected that the ring had become more than an instrument of power, it had become an obsession. But 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 could no longer be stopped. He felt that every desire was within his reach, that nothing could stop him. Invisibility offered him pleasures beyond imagination. It was no longer just about bodies, gold, or secrets. One night, he entered the sacred temple of the goddess Artemis, where access was forbidden to any man. He saw the priestesses praying, dancing, naked with mysteries in the light of torches. For the first time, he felt real fear. He had entered the space of the gods. But even this fear turned into ecstasy. It was as if even the gods could not stop him. From that moment on, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 began to believe that invisibility made him more than a man. He felt untouchable, immortal, above the laws of mortals. However, absolute freedom came with a price. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 discovered that he could no longer sleep peacefully, and in his dream, he saw candles, accusing him, saw himself entering the women's chambers, stealing gold, trampling on sanctuaries. He heard his heart telling him that everything he did was leading him to the abyss. But every morning, when he put the ring on his finger, he felt the call again. Tea was a vice, a drunkenness that could no longer be stopped. The queen once told him, "Be careful, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉. The power of the ring is not only a gift, it is also a curse. It changes you." He answered her with a cold smile. "It does not change me. It makes me what I was meant to be." But deep down he knew that was not true. One night, when Sardis was sleeping, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 walked invisibly through the deserted squares, entered the houses of simple people, watched them sleep, touched their objects, listened to their breathing. He felt master of their lives, knew that he could kill anyone without getting caught, but he didn't. Not yet. He was content with the sensation of power, with the sweetness of darkness. He was a god among mortals, an unseen demon who hovered over the city, and this sensation had become his supreme pleasure. Thus, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉, once the innocent shepherd, had become a slave to the pleasures offered by invisibility. The ring, which had been his means of survival at first, had transformed into a gateway to boundless desires. Each night brought him new temptations, each day pushed him further from the man he had been. The king seemed stronger than ever in the eyes of the people, but a huge void was born in his soul, fed by pleasures and sins. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 was no longer just a man with a secret. He was a man seduced by power, a prisoner of his own freedom, a mortal who believed himself to be a god. And this drunkenness would lead him to a greater chasm than all the previous ones. Chapter 21. The Shadow of Guilt. After weeks of absolute power and unlimited pleasure, the silence of the night began to become unfriendly to 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. Invisibility, once a tool of freedom and triumph, was now becoming a cruel mirror of his own conscience. Deep down, something began to shake. The vocation of the invisible was no longer just a gift, but a burden impossible to ignore. One day, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 appeared as a strong, firm, and admired king. But the knights found him alone, a prisoner of his own mind. In his royal chamber, with the windows drawn and the torches flickering weakly, he was face to face with the shadows of the past. Every time he passed his finger over the ring, he felt a part of him break, that his absolute freedom was overshadowed by a feeling of guilt that he could no longer ignore. First, there were only brief shivers, a gesture he had made the previous night when he had entered a courtesan's room, or a smile while he listened to the nobles' conversations without them knowing. He knew that in those moments, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt a hollowness in his stomach, like a silent warning. But the guilt didn't just come from his actions, it also came from the realization that he had become someone else. The simple man, the shepherd who once enjoyed the sun and the fields, was gone. He had been replaced by a king seduced by power, who could no longer distinguish pleasure from moral crime. Every night, when the city slept, dreams began to invade his mind. The first dreams were vague, like fleeting shadows. He saw Candles looking down from somewhere above, his eyes wide, accusing, whispering to him, "Who?" Each time, the voice of the deceased king grew louder, piercing the corridors of 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's mind and making him wake up sweating, his heart beating wildly. Then, the dreams became more intense. He saw Candles still alive, following him through the halls of the palace. The doors were closed before he could pass, and the corridor seemed to stretch on endlessly, and no matter how hard he tried to run, his steps were silent only to others, but not to his own conscience. Other nights, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 dreamed of all the victims of his invisibility, courtesans, nobles, servants, simple people who had no idea that he had been present at their secrets. He heard their whispers, felt their fear and hope, and these haunted him until dawn. The guilt began to turn into psychological isolation. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 felt that no one could understand him. The queen saw him only as an ally and partner, admiring his skill and strength, but did not share his anxieties. His advisers and courtiers respected and feared him, but they did not know his inner turmoil. Thus, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 came to be alone with the shadows of the night and the ghostly voices from his dreams. This isolation became increasingly oppressive, because no one could see him invisible, but he could no longer ignore what he had become. As the weeks passed, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 began to notice that absolute power did not bring happiness, but anxiety. Every decision, every stolen glance, every desire satisfied without repercussions, made him feel increasingly empty inside. Invisibility had offered him infinite pleasures, but also a feeling of complete alienation. One evening, looking at Sardis from the balcony of the palace, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 realized that people looked at him with respect and fear, but not with love. He realized that he had been a spectator of his own life. He took what he wanted without being discovered, but no one really knew him. "I have everything and yet I have nothing," he whispered to himself, his voice lost in the wind. Queen Pirisane noticed the change in his behavior, and in the evening, she called him to her chambers. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 walked invisibly, but this time not to spy or use his power, but to confess. "I feel like I don't know who I am anymore," he confessed to her, his voice trembling. "This invisibility makes me free and captive at the same time. Dreams haunt me, I feel like guilt is eating me up inside." The queen, calm and calculated, stared at him. "This is the price of power, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌. The gods do not give gifts without asking for something in return. If you want to rule, you must accept the shadows that come with the light." These words did not reassure him, but they made him understand that he could not run away from himself. Invisibility and power needed balance, and he had not found it yet. Guilt did not manifest itself only in dreams. During the day, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 began to notice subtle signs, whispers that seemed to catch him, gestures of nobles that made him feel that his deeds were known, small coincidences that seemed like divine messages. In his soul, the fear deepened that the magic of the ring could not protect the mind from its own inner judge. Even during the consultations with the court, he felt that each decision overwhelmed him. He wondered, how many had died indirectly because of him? How many loves or friendships had been destroyed by his hidden desires? 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 began to meditate on laws and morality. Until then, he had believed that justice was just a convention, that the fear of punishment kept people in check. But now he saw that there was an inner law, invisible, that could not be circumvented. Absolute power seduced him, but conscience betrayed him constantly. "Maybe no one sees me," he thought, "but I see myself. And I can't run away from myself." This revelation made him realize that invisibility does not erase responsibility. On the contrary, it amplifies it, because every action remains imprinted in the soul. One night, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 walked through the palace, invisible, and noticed that every step was followed by the shadows of the walls and his own vague reflection. He felt prisoner of his own power. This subtle fear became an obsession. He wondered if he had already made a mistake and no one could punish him. What kind of man was he becoming? In the dream, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 returned, not as the murdered king, but as an omnipresent shadow, following him and whispering that no man can escape the consequences of his deeds. Thus, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 discovered that absolute power and invisibility bring not only pleasures, but also a curse of conscience. The shadow of guilt began to control his nights and thoughts, bringing him disturbing dreams and doubts that could not be ignored. The innocent shepherd had disappeared. The king, seduced by power, who had once lost himself in the freedom of invisibility, began to feel the real weight of his deeds. Doubts, fears, and guilt constantly followed him, preparing him for the conflicts and challenges that would follow. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 now understood that true power does not lie only in invisibility or the throne, but in the mastery of one's own conscience. And on this night, for the first time since the discovery of the ring, he felt truly trapped, not by people, but by himself. Chapter 22. The Kingdom Under Terror. At first, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's accession to the throne had been welcomed with hope. The nobility and the people had believed that the new king would bring stability and prosperity, especially after the tense years of 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's reign. But little by little, in the heart of every inhabitant of Lydia, from Sardis to the villages on the edge of the empire, a silent fear was born. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was not just a king. He was a specter, an unseen presence, a force that could be anywhere and nowhere, and no one knew when he looked, when he listened, when he judged. His invisibility, his greatest secret, gradually became the terror of everyone, and the royal palace. Silence had become an unwritten law. The servants moved slowly, avoiding speaking too loudly. The nobility, once proud and arrogant, were afraid to raise their voices even at banquets. Everyone knew that 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 had an unusual gift, but no one knew exactly what it was. It was rumored that the gods had given him invisible eyes, that he could sneak among people without being noticed. In reality, only the queen knew the full truth about the ring. The rest of the court only knew the distorted legend. Some believed that the king could fly like an eagle, others that he could penetrate the souls of people. But whatever the explanation, everyone had come to the same conclusion. There was no defense against such a king, and the city, people had begun to speak in whispers even in the markets. Women no longer told their secrets even to each other, men avoided gossiping, and merchants were afraid to cheat on the scales. The impression had been created that the king was always present, like an invisible shadow that could hear and see everything. Children were warned by their parents not to raise their voices, not to complain about taxes, and to speak the king's name only with respect. Even the street singers had chosen verses that praised him, for fear that they would otherwise be silenced by an unseen eye in such an atmosphere. Freedom of the soul disappeared. Lydia seemed to flourish on the outside, but inside it was stifled by fear. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 had not originally set out to rule through terror. First, he used the ring to learn hidden truths, to uncover plots or to punish corruption. But over time, power changed his perception. He had discovered how easily he could manipulate people, how simple it was to frighten an opponent just by letting him believe that he was being followed. Sometimes, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 allowed himself to play with the psyche of the courtiers. He would disappear into the middle of an audience, leaving a void of horror. Other times, he would leave his ring on the table in front of a noble, just to make him tremble. Without saying anything, on several occasions, he whispered in the ear of an opponent in the dark, making him believe that the gods were warning him. All these gestures consolidated his authority, but at the same time isolated his soul from the people. The nobility could not conceive of a way of resistance. Normally, tyrant kings were overthrown by plots. Steel, poison, or betrayal from within were their weapons. But against 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, all seemed useless. "How can you attack a man you cannot see?" complained a boyar. "How can you hide a plan from someone who may be right here, unseen, listening to us?" answered another. Thus, plots were thwarted before they could take shape. Fear made people suspect each other of collaboration, and 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 continued his reign unhindered. Fear gave birth to superstitions. Some said that 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was not a man, but a demon descended from the underworld. Others believed that the gods had given him the power to punish Lydia for her sins. In the villages, people they lit torches and incense to drive away the king's spirit. Some even tried to protect themselves through rituals. They wrote his name on pieces of clay and buried them, hoping that this would keep him at bay. But all this only strengthened the legend. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 had become a living myth, a collective fear that paralyzed any thought of resistance. Despite his absolute power, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 began to feel an emptiness. The people respected and feared him, but they did not love him and the palace. He surrounded himself with luxury and people, but he remained alone. Not even the queen could fill this abyss. She herself saw him more as an instrument of her will than as a man. The invisibility, which had given him the supreme sensation of freedom, now made him realize that he was cut off from humanity. No one could look him in the eye with sincerity, no one could contradict him without fear, no one could love him without suspicion. To maintain his authority, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖉 began to set examples of power. A noble found corrupt would disappear without a trace, merchant caught in a scam would be found dead at dawn, and rumor had it that the king himself, unseen, had taken his life. These acts were not numerous, but their impact was immense. A few mysterious executions were enough for the whole of Lydia to live under terror. The kingdom had changed profoundly. Order seemed perfect, theft had decreased, corruption was less, people worked more and more correctly. But not out of virtue, but out of fear. This silent terror stifled creativity, joy, and trust. Friends no longer confided in each other, spouses no longer shared their secrets, neighbors suspected each other. The very essence of the community had been destroyed. 𝕽𝖎𝖉 had managed to build a perfect order, but the price was the dehumanization of an entire kingdom. In his moments of solitude, 𝕽𝖎𝖉 wondered if this was his destiny or the curse of the ring. Knew that he had created a submissive kingdom, but he could not escape the question, do the people follow me because I am a leader or because they are afraid of what they do not understand? His dreams of candles and his own guilt came back to him. He realized that invisibility, although it had made him master of people's bodies, had alienated him from their souls. Thus, Lydia is depicted as a kingdom prosperous on the outside, but suffocated by fear on the inside, and no one knows how to defend themselves from an invisible king. Neither sword, nor plot, nor prayers seem to offer any escape. 𝕽𝖎𝖉 reigns unchallenged, but his reign is built on a foundation of terror and distrust. And as the kingdom trembles, the king himself begins to feel the burden of isolation and absolute loneliness. What had once been a gift now seems to become a curse that will accompany him to the end. Chapter 23. The Voice of the Philosophers. 𝕽𝖎𝖉's reign, based on fear and mystery, seemed unshakable. The nobility was paralyzed by terror, the people obeyed in silence, and the king's invisibility raised him above all law. However, what neither the sword nor the plots had managed to do, began to take root through the word, the voice of the philosophers. In an era when thought and wisdom were valued, masters of words dared to touch on subjects that others avoided. Not with weapons, but with questions, they shook the foundation of certainties. And one day, such a voice came to confront 𝕽𝖎𝖉 himself. It was said that a wandering philosopher, who came from the Phrygian hills, had settled in Sardis. He called young people to the squares, spoke to them about virtue, about inner freedom, and about how true power does not come from his name was 𝕽𝖓𝖓𝖓, a white-bearded man with piercing eyes and an unwavering calm in his voice. First, 𝕽𝖎𝖉 did not pay attention to him. But the news that people were gathering around him and that he was talking about tyranny, about the illusion of happiness brought by absolute power, reached the ears of the king. Curiosity and restlessness made him call him to the palace. Perhaps from the desire to silence him, perhaps from a secret impulse of the soul that wanted answers, 𝕽𝖎𝖉 decided to confront this man in the throne room. 𝕽𝖓𝖓𝖓 walked calmly, without lowering his gaze. Unlike other subjects who trembled before the king, he seemed fearless. 𝕽𝖎𝖉, wrapped in purple, looked at him for a long time, as if he were an oddity, a simple man, without an army, without wealth, but with a dignity that could not be hidden. "I have heard that you speak to people about happiness and virtue," said the king. "Tell me then, wise man, what is happiness for a king who has everything?" The philosopher looked at him directly, and his voice resounded calmly. "Happiness, O king, does not consist in having everything, but in not being a slave to anything. He who depends on the power, pleasures, or fear of others is not a master, but a slave. I ask you too. You, who can be invisible and who hold a kingdom in your hands, are you truly free? Or are you a prisoner of your ring?" These words fell like an invisible sword into the soul of 𝕽𝖎𝖉. 𝕽𝖎𝖉 had expected flattery, fear, beautiful but harmless wisdom. But instead of these, received a question that revealed his inner wound. Was he happy? Since the murder of candles until now, power had enveloped him with a feeling of invincibility, but also with a painful loneliness. Had the night of the plot been a step towards freedom or the beginning of slavery under a force stronger than men, the ring itself? 𝕽𝖓𝖓𝖓 looked at him silently, letting him ponder his thoughts. In that oppressive silence, 𝕽𝖎𝖉 felt that the question was not just a challenge, but a mirror. "You speak like a man who does not know power," said the king, trying to regain control. "What would be your virtue, wise man, if you had no bread on the table? If you were persecuted?" I brought order, I banished corruption, I made people live without fear. Anacharsis smiled quietly. You brought tranquility, but not peace. Order, but not justice. When people are silent out of fear, their silence is not contentment, but a chain. Tell me, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, if everyone left you, if the ring were torn from your finger, would you still be master? Or would you be just a lost shepherd who forgot where he came from? 𝕽𝖎𝖓 started, and no one had ever mentioned his life as a shepherd. Only the queen knew the truth, and yet this philosopher had spoken it with disarming simplicity. You are a dangerous man, Anacharsis, said the king. Only the mirror is dangerous, not the one who holds it, replied the philosopher. The meeting ended without punishment, to the astonishment of the court. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 did not throw him into prison, nor did he banish him, but set him free. But Anacharsis' words followed him like a shadow, and the following nights, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 dreamed again, saw Candaules looking at him, at the queen chained by his cold gaze, at the people who were silent in fear. And among all these images, the simple question resounded, Are you truly happy? He tried to convince himself that yes, he had palaces, riches, women, armies, invisibility itself. And yet, deep down, he felt that none of this gave him peace. The rumor that the philosopher had spoken to the king with such courage spread quickly in the squares. People whispered with a hidden hope, Perhaps there is someone who can stand up to our invisible king. There were no plots, no weapons, just words. But those words lit sparks where fear had consumed everything. For the first time in a long time, a crack appeared in the wall of terror in people's souls. If a single man could speak to the king like this, perhaps he was not invincible. The king walked alone through his palace, invisible, listening to the prayers, fears, and murmurings of his subjects. He noticed how deep the fear was and how great the distance between him and his people was. He remembered his youth, when he herded his flocks on the hills, when he laughed with simple friends, and when he had no other wealth than the clear sky. Those were hard times, but his soul was freer then than now, surrounded by gold and obedience. The philosopher's question followed him like a curse. If freedom means not depending on anything, then he was the most enslaved of all, the prisoner of the ring and the fear he had created. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 tried to lie to himself. He told the queen that he was the greatest of kings, that the gods had given him the power to rule. He repeated to his courtiers that order was proof of the happiness of the people. But the more he said these words, the stronger he felt the inner emptiness. The queen looked at him with suspicion, sensing the change. Don't weaken, 𝕽𝖎𝖓, she told him. Happiness is for the little ones. You are king, and kings do not seek happiness, but glory. But in his soul, the king knew that glory without peace was only a mask over an abyss, and the silence of the palace. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 began to feel the weight of a crown that no longer seemed like a triumph, but a burden. Anacharsis' question followed him like a sentence. You have everything, 𝕽𝖎𝖓. But are you truly happy? And in his heart, for the first time, the king had no answer. Chapter 24. Justice Lost. After his meeting with Anacharsis, King 𝕽𝖎𝖓 was no longer the same. Neither wealth, nor power, nor invisibility brought him that dizzying sensation of triumph that he had once felt, and his nights. The silence of the palace had become oppressive, and peace was no longer a blessing, but a torment. Although outwardly he continued to reign unshakably, in his heart he realized that he had lost something precious. Peace of soul, no matter how hard he tried to deny it. The truth was clear. Justice, once alienated, would not return. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 remembered with pain the moment when he had first placed the crown on his forehead. Then he had thought it was the culmination of his destiny, from shepherd to king, from a nameless man to master of Lydia. But now, each weight of the crown seemed to him a chain. The gold no longer pleased him, the throne no longer comforted him. Even the queen, who had been his accomplice, now seemed more alien to him. Her smiles hid calculations, and her glances betrayed a desire for control. A chasm had opened between them that neither the ring, nor power, nor memories could cover. More and more often, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 dreamed of the face of Candaules. He saw him rise from the shadows, his eyes full of reproach, not for his death, but for the betrayal of justice. I gave you my trust, the king's ghost seemed to say, and you answered with blood. You had the power to choose, and you chose the easy way. But the easy way is the hardest. These visions haunted him even during the day. Everywhere he looked, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt that the palace walls, the heavy draperies, even the queen's jewels whispered the same word to him. Guilty, he appeared less and less before the people. He used his invisibility to hide from the gaze of others, not to control them. Even the eyes of his servants frightened him, because in them he felt the reflection of his own fears. The court, accustomed to a sure and cruel ruler, began to murmur. The nobility did not understand why the king was retreating, and the people were losing their trust, and the absence of a firm hand. Rumors sprouted that 𝕽𝖎𝖓 had been cursed, that the gods had abandoned him, that his invisibility was the sign of divine guilt. 𝕽𝖎 Solitude, the king always returned to the same question: can there be happiness without justice? He tried to find justifications, that the murder of Candaules had been inevitable, that the people were afraid and thus protected, that the queen was a destiny, not a choice. But no matter how much he tried to find excuses, his conscience answered him dryly. There is no peace for the one who built on blood and lies. One night, drawn by a force he could not control, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖃 put on his ring and, invisibly, left the palace. He wanted to feel the breath of the people again, to see how those he was supposed to lead lived. What he discovered shook him. The people did not speak of their king with hope, but with fear. They closed their gates early, they were careful not to say his name aloud, and children were warned not to shout in play, for perhaps the king would hear them. It was not love, it was not respect, it was only terror. And then 𝕽𝖎𝖃 understood that his reign was not a kingdom, but a huge prison in which he was the first prisoner. One evening, he tried to open his soul to the queen. "Don't you feel, wife, that I have lost something? We have power, but we have no peace. We have a throne, but we have no peace. The gods are watching us, and in my sleep I hear the voices of the dead." The queen looked at him coldly. "The voices are only in your mind. Power is not made for peace, but for glory. What does justice matter if everyone is afraid to ask for it?" But it was this answer that crushed 𝕽𝖎𝖃. He understood now. The queen had no remorse, no anxieties. She only sought power, while he, although caught in her chains, was beginning to seek the salvation of his soul. And in a dream, 𝕽𝖎𝖃 saw himself again as a shepherd on the hills. His fingers were bare, without a ring, and life was simple: the field, the flocks, the song of the wind. But suddenly, a heavy shadow fell over the serene landscape. A huge ring emerged from the ground, which swallowed him whole. When he woke up, his forehead was wet with sweat. He touched his hand and felt the cold ring, like an invisible handcuff. Then he truly understood. He did not control the ring, but the ring controlled him. Distraught, 𝕽𝖎𝖃 called Anacharsis again, and the mystery of the night. He brought him to the palace gardens and, for the first time, confessed his struggle. "You tell me that I am a slave. But what can I do? If I let go of my power, I lose everything. If I keep it, my soul perishes. How can one get out of this circle?" The philosopher answered gently, "The circle is built by your choices. True power does not lie in the ring, but in being able to give it up. Lost justice can only be found through the courage to choose it again, even if you lose your throne, even if you lose your life. There is no peace without truth, king." These words were for 𝕽𝖎𝖃 like a blow and a comfort at the same time. The days that followed were a torment for him. Between the duty of king and the call of conscience, between the desire to keep the throne and the thirst to find his soul, 𝕽𝖎𝖃 felt himself breaking in two in front of the court. He kept his face cold, but in secret, in sleepless nights, he felt poorer than ever. He realized that justice could not be bought with gold, nor hidden by invisibility. Tea was missing from his heart, and without it no happiness could last. One day, looking at the ring, a strange thought came to him. It was a perfect circle, but precisely that perfection made him captive. That circle symbolized his captivity, the lack of a way out. That moment, he fully understood. The lost justice was like a broken line in the circle of his life, and until he repaired it, peace could not return. The day ended with the image of 𝕽𝖎𝖃 alone, sitting on the steps of the throne, holding the crown in one hand and the ring in the other. In his eyes there was no longer pride, but a painful awareness that he had lost what no king, no god, no weapon could give him back: the peace of his heart. And, for the first time, a desire was born in his soul: not to conquer, not to dominate, but to find out if there is still a way back to the lost justice. Chapter 25. The Curse of the Ring. At dawn on a gray day, 𝕽𝖎𝖃's palace seemed emptier than ever. Between the cold walls, the king's footsteps echoed lonely, like an echo of his own conscience. Although he had everything a man could want, the throne of Lydia, the obedience of the people, unprecedented wealth, a void had deepened in his heart that could no longer be filled. Invisibility, once a source of pleasure and freedom, had now become a burden. The power to pass unnoticed among people made him feel cut off from them, a stranger in his own world. And the ring, with its cold brilliance, had become a symbol of a force that brought nothing but loneliness and spiritual ruin. 𝕽𝖎𝖃 rose to his throne every day, but his eyes were empty. The words of the philosopher Anacharsis echoed incessantly in his mind: true power is not in carrying the ring, but in being able to give it up. Every time he looked at his hand and saw the golden circle, the king asked himself, "Can I take it off? Can I live without it?" But his fingers tightened ever more, as if the fear of losing everything he had gained was stronger than the desire to be free. Thus he began to understand that the ring was not just an object, but a curse, a test of the gods or fate, intended to show that no one escapes unpunished from their own greed. While 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 was struggling, Queen 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌, the woman who had been the spark of the entire plot, seemed colder and colder, more calculating. She saw in the ring only a weapon, a means to preserve her throne. And glory, why are you afraid? She rebuked him. The people are silent. The nobles obey. The gods do not descend among men. You are the king, and the ring makes you invincible. Enjoy your gift and stop looking for shadows in your soul. But it was precisely these words that hurt him the most. He understood that the queen did not share his struggle, that for her morality did not matter, an invisible chasm had opened between them. He wanted to save his soul. She wanted to keep her power at all costs. Outside the palace, the people of Lydia lived in terror. The story of the invisible king had become a legend. Some believed that he could hear every whisper, that he entered their houses unknowingly, that he saw all hidden thoughts and the squares. People spoke more and more quietly. Some priests dared to say that the gods were angry, that 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's reign was not blessed, but cursed, and these murmurings, although hidden, reached the king's ears and increased his torment. I am not loved, he told himself. I am not respected, I am only feared. And what is fear, if not another form of hatred? In that night, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 dreamed that he was again in the giant's tomb where he had found the ring. The sarcophagus was open, and the colossal body reached out to him. You took what was not meant for you, the voice thundered. My power brought only destruction, and you dug it up to be cursed, for you will not find peace until you pay the price. When he woke up, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 felt the ring burning his finger. He tore it from his hand and threw it to the floor. But, to his amazement, the ring did not stay there, as if drawn by an unseen force. It rolled on its own and stopped again at his foot. The king understood that he could not escape so easily, and the following days, he tried several times to destroy the ring. He threw it into the fire. But the flames did not touch it. He struck it with iron hammers, but the gold remained untouched. He threw it into the waters of a river, but in the morning he found it on his finger, as if it had never left him. The curse was clear. The ring could not be broken, nor abandoned. It was now part of 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's fate, a bond from which he could not escape, no matter how much he wanted to. Then the king understood that the real struggle was not against the ring, but against his own weakness. Power had not ruined him. Alone, he had been the one who had allowed it to rule his soul. On long nights, he looked at himself in the palace mirror and saw not the face of a king, but of a man torn between two paths, that of absolute power and that of spiritual freedom. But to choose the second he had to give up everything he had, and this courage seemed beyond his strength. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 always returned to the same dilemma. Which is harder, to live as a feared king, but a slave to the ring, or die free, but deprived of everything you gained? Neither the philosopher, nor the gods, nor the dreams offered him a clear answer. He was left alone with his question, like an endless road. And perhaps this was precisely the essence of the curse. Not just power, but the inability to find peace in it. Meanwhile, Lydia continued to exist. People lived their lives, the lands were cultivated, trade prospered. On the surface, 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌's reign seemed solid. But deep down, an unseen wound was bleeding, the wound of a ruler who had lost his soul. History would record him as a great king, founder of a dynasty, but what value did all this have when he knew that inside he was just an empty man? In a final scene, 𝕽𝖎𝖓 stands alone on the palace terrace, watching the sunset. In his left hand he holds the crown, in his right the ring. The wind brings him whispers from the past, the voice of Candles, the laughter of the queen, the words of the philosopher, the murmur of the people. He looks at the ring and whispers. This power brought me the throne, but it stole my peace. I am king over an empire, but a slave in my heart. Is there any escape? But no answer comes. Only the silence of the sunset and the rippling of the wind between the palace columns. 𝕽𝖎𝖓 puts the ring on his finger again. He feels his body disappearing, invisibility enveloping him like a cloak of shadow. He raises his eyes to the sky and, for the first time, he does not know if this is his victory or defeat. Legend has it that 𝕽𝖎𝖓's ring never disappeared. Some believe that it remained hidden in a tomb, others that it still walks among people, waiting for a new bearer. But whoever finds it will learn the same lesson. Absolute power never brings peace, but only another kind of chaining. And perhaps that is precisely why the story does not end, but continues, as a warning to all those who think they can carry the gifts of the gods on their shoulders without losing their souls. Epilogue. It is said that after years of reign, 𝕽𝖎𝖓, the king who had reached the throne through invisibility and bloody betrayal, no longer knew peace. In the eyes of his subjects the gold of the crown shone, but in the depths of his soul darkness spread. Power had brought him wealth, pleasures and fears, but not peace. The nights followed him with dreams of blood. He saw Candles, the murdered king, reaching out his hand over his shoulder, calling him back to the depths of the giant's tomb, saw the merciless gods turning their faces, as if the man had fallen under his own burden. And although the ring had given him the power to disappear, it could not save him from himself. Thus 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 keame to understand the curse late. The ring was not a gift from the gods, but a test, an unseen mirror, meant to show what is hidden. Deep in the heart, the weak of soul were lost, and the strong found the path to true virtue. 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 no longer knew which of the two he found himself in. One night, legends say, he descended alone into the royal temples and placed the ring on the silent altar of the goddess of justice. No one has seen him since. Some believe he perished, swallowed by his own shadow. Others say he wandered the world, carrying his guilt like an unhealed wound. But the ring? It is said that it disappeared, that the earth swallowed it again, waiting for another era, another curious soul, another temptation. And that is why the story of 𝕽𝖎𝖓𝖌 is not just a legend of antiquity, but a warning for all, because the ring can be anywhere, in the hand of a king, in the desires of a simple man, in the temptation to believe that, unseen, we are free to do anything. And then, the question resounds again. What would you do if no one saw you? That is where, in fact, the true judgment begins.